Thank you, everyone. We are now live for the June 30th Parks and Recreation meeting. Welcome. I want to thank staff for helping us hold this meeting, and I hope everyone continues to be safe and healthy out there. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand now, and we can get you set up to speak in oral communications soon. With that, we'll move forward to Catherine. Please do a roll call.
Commissioner Greenfield?
Here.
Commissioner Cribbs?
Here.
Commissioner Lemaire?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Moss?
Here.
Commissioner Reckdahl?
Here.
Thank you. Now we're on to agenda changes and oral communications. First agenda issues. Does anyone have any agenda change request or deletion before we move on to more oral communications? Okay, thank you. And Catherine, do we have anyone who would like to speak in oral communications?
Chair, I'm not seeing any public speaking requests on the, oh wait, I'm sorry. There is one public speaker. Catherine, are you seeing this in the attendees? Right now you're muted.
Sorry, it's Ryan Mccauley.
Thank you and welcome, Ryan. You have an opportunity to speak during oral communications, and please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. I know you must all be wondering, what in the world is he doing here? In light of my resignation from the commission last week, I wanted to join you briefly tonight to express my gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to serve with all of you. As I wrote to you last week, I've been uniformly impressed by the commitment you have shown to our community, and I wanted to say that again tonight. I've also been incredibly impressed throughout my, I think it was 4 years of service on the commission, at how each of you, in a different way, but in a very creative way, gets to the nut of a problem, the core of a problem, and solves it. The PRC has been working to responsibly reform the Foothills Park residents-only policy for a long time. I'm proud of the work that the PRC has done to date, including our vote last November, and most recently, the unanimous voice of all members of the PRC standing up to support repeal of the residents-only ordinance. The repeal of the residents-only ordinance should be the easy part. It hasn't been thus far, but it should be. The harder part is the second piece of the call to action here, which is to formulate a non-discriminatory policy that prioritizes equal access and resource protection. As you look forward, I encourage you to think about this as an opportunity to hit the reset button on this particular policy. What I mean by that is that this is the time not to cobble together a small or incremental improvement on top of a bad ordinance, but rather to think hard about the best management practices and formulate a policy that our community will be proud to have on the books. I realize that you might ask, why are you jumping ship just at the time when you might be needed in this process? The answer is multifaceted, but it comes back to, at the end of the day, my own analysis of the legal issues at play here and my personal conclusion that the Foothills Ordinance is not just morally wrong, but it's also wrong as a matter of law. Having concluded that the ordinance is in deep legal trouble, combined with the council majority's decision last week to postpone any discussion, and perhaps mostly informed by council members' private feedback that they don't want to touch this issue with a 10-foot pole because they believe it's too politically toxic, I personally have lost confidence in our political leaders' ability or interest to meaningfully tackle this issue. And because of my day job as a prosecutor, while I previously felt comfortable working through the political system toward a policy solution that seemed to be in sight, I don't believe that I can continue serving in the city's system of governance while the council maintains the status quo. I realize that there are those who will say that the council majority only put this off temporarily to alleviate a busy schedule. And I appreciate that our council members have been putting in long hours and our staff have been putting in even longer ones. But we all know that we find time for matters that are important, and this issue is not presently a priority for most council members. I very much wish that the council members who voted to postpone discussion will prove me wrong by acting immediately in August. However, I think it's very important that this be not a negative narrative, but a positive one. And so to circle back to where I began, I offer you two final thoughts. First, I have great affinity for all of you and for the CSD staff. Thank you for your service and for your friendship to me. Second, I believe that there's much good work remaining to be done by the PRC on this issue and many others. As it concerns Foothills Park, the community needs the PRC's leadership and perspective. I know that Darren and Kristen have a plan for further community engagement, and I welcome that. But on this policy issue, our community needs leadership. I think that leadership can only come from the PRC at this juncture, and that the council will be deferring heavily to the PRC. I am always available to help, and I look forward to witnessing the great work that the PRC will achieve this year and for many years into the future. Thank you, and best wishes to all of you.
Thank you, Ryan. As you well know, it's not appropriate for the commission members to comment on comments from speakers during oral communications, but I think it is. I feel comfortable in taking this opportunity to thank you for your service to our community, for your dedication and passion. Your efforts as part of this body will be missed, and we wish you well. So thank you very much, and best to you, and we'll keep in touch. Are there, I don't know if it's appropriate to allow anyone else, any other commission members, to make a brief comment if they'd like to, without getting into substance. Anne, go ahead.
Yes, I wasn't sure whether it was appropriate at this point, but I really appreciate Commissioner Mccauley's service to the PRC. I learned a lot from him on a lot of issues, and certainly had a good time with the dog parts in the bathrooms as well. And I thought that he brought so much to the commission. It will be very difficult to replace him. Thanks for letting me have a few words.
Any other commissioners? Thank you, Ryan.
I just want to say, this is Keith. I enjoyed working with you, Ryan, and good luck. I'm sure we'll see you around.
Indeed. Same to everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers for oral communications? If not, then let's please move on to the department report.
Thank you, Chair. Darren Anderson with Community Services Department. The first item on the department report was to talk about Ryan Mccauley, as you know, has resigned from the commission. And the clerk's office is checking to see if they can add the vacant commission position to their current recruitment, which has an application deadline of July 21st. And if not, they'll roll it into their next recruitment, which will be the beginning of August. And I'll let you know when I have more information. I too would like to echo the sentiments to Mr. Mccauley, acknowledging him and thanking him for his service. It's a great pleasure working with him, and I really admire his passion and his dedication. I wish him well. Next update is about the Valley Water community meeting that was held on their Tidegate project. This was on June 24th. Valley Water's website has the presentation materials all on the site. That's valleywater.org/PAFB Tidegates. If you just Google Valley Water and Tidegates, it'll come up. And the website has a tremendous amount of information. I won't go over too many of the details other than the core elements of their tentative project schedule, which is that they're going to complete the planning phase that they're currently in and release a draft CEQA MND for public comment in the summer of 2020. They plan on releasing the draft CEQA MND also in the summer of 2020 and completing their 100% design in the spring of 2021. and hope to start construction in the fall of 2021 and complete the project completely in January 2025. A little update on the golf course. Generally, the golf course is doing well. Most days, tee times sell out, or just a few tee time slots are unbooked, which tend to be the late afternoon times, which are the least popular. However, the course, I would not say is at capacity or truly sold out, as these tee times are 12 minutes apart for social distancing purposes. Regularly, tee times would be more like 8 to 10 minutes apart. I'm going to go over just a few of the basic rules because I think it's helpful, for our commission to know and any of the public who may watch. All the tee times must be prepaid online, so there's no walk-up or in-person reservations allowed. There's no early arrival, and golfers are asked to please leave once they've done playing, practicing, and dining. No extended socializing, which is previously very common on the golf course. As I mentioned, the tee times are 12 minutes apart for proper social distancing and to reduce any bunching up of groups and waiting. Golf groups will be allowed up to 4 players per tee time arrival. There are no tournament play allowed right now. The golf course pro shop and cafe remain closed to guests. However, on-site sales limited to food and to go and essentials like golf balls, sunscreen, and hats and gloves are available. And now there is self-seating in the outdoor patio area of the cafe. There's no table service and the food is still packaged to go, but customers may self-serve. Again, there are no cash transactions, so it's only credit card and debit cards that will be accepted as payment. Regarding golf courts, only one person may be allowed per golf cart at a time, unless you're playing with a family member of the same household. The practice facilities are open, the range is open, but with limited number of hitting stalls, again, to maintain social distancing. And teaching and instruction is also allowed with one-on-one instruction with no more than 2 instructors or 2 students in a designated teaching area. That's the tent along Embarcadero Road. The safe parking program that my colleague, Lam Do, he's the superintendent, briefed you on at the last commission meeting. And the safe parking program is a planning department's program where they would like to implement a temporary spot for safe parking next to the fire station at the Baylands Athletic Center on Gang Road. This area, as Lam had mentioned before, is not on parkland and it's fenced off from the adjacent athletic center. I haven't received any updates on the next steps or timeframe from that program, but I've got requests into the project leaders from planning, and I'll let you know as soon as I have more information. Kristen O'Kane gave me a brief update on Cubberley to share with you. City Council approved the lease with PAUSD for Cubberley on June 22nd, and a joint letter was released to the public by the city and school district and can be found at the cityofpaloalto.org/news/display news. Kristen also noted that we're very close to finding space for all the tenants that had been displaced and are hoping to have that finalized in the next few days. I want to give you a brief update on recreation, arts, and sciences programs. On-site, on-site in-person summer camps with stable groups of 12 campers start next week. We have a wide array of programs from the Junior Museum and Zoo, Art Center, Children's Theater, and our recreation programs, including our popular camp at Foothills Park. Limited spaces are still available for camps all summer long. All the in-person programs will follow strict core safety guidelines, including daily wellness checks for participants and staff, the physical distancing measures in place, and strict hand washing procedures, increased custodial cleaning and sanitation. And our camps have been modified to meet the county health orders. And one of the most notable changes you may notice is that this year, most of our camps are going to be longer than they'd been in the past. And this change is in response to the county's guidance. The children may attend at most 1 summer camp program every 3-week period. The virtual programming is doing well. We're starting virtual ceramics lessons next week. And this includes a pilot program that allows some of our experienced ceramic students the opportunity to rent a potter's wheel to follow along at home. The public art program is overseeing the creation of a Black Lives Matter mural as directed by Council and Public Art Commission. 16 artist teams from diverse backgrounds were selected to come together today to create the Black Lives mural on Hamilton Avenue in front of City Hall. On Monday, the letters were stenciled in preparation for the work that began at 7 a.m. this morning. And each artist team will paint a different letter with water-based acrylic paints. A brief update on the pool. We have lap swim. This is all information you can find on the website if you want more details. Lap swim is listed the hours from June 7th to July 31st. And I thought some people might be interested. That's a Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 3:45 p.m. and Saturday, 6 a.m. to 11 and 3 p.m. to 6, and on Sunday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. I thought it might be interesting also for people to note on July 4th, the Rinconada pool will be open from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. and that's Saturday, July 4th. However, the play pool will be closed for the season. Lap swimming, the lanes are dedicated to lap swimming in the performance pool 7 days per week, year round, with a lifeguard on duty at all times. And due to the new safety protocols, they're limiting the operations to 1 swimmer per lane. The pool is also offering a summer camp called Camp Rinconada for kids ages 7 to 12. And this is a child swim level is assessed on the first day of camp, and campers with similar abilities are grouped together. And I double checked the website just before we came on. The camp has dates from June 8th to 26th. That's the 3-week camp. That section is already full. However, the June 29th to July 17th still has availability. And there are youth scholarships available from Beyond Barriers Athletic Foundation. And you can find more information on that on the website. A little bit of information on the county health order. Our current health order that went into effect on June 5th, I should note that this is going to be updated sometime soon, potentially next week. So be prepared for more changes to our order. And this can be found on the Santa Clara County webpage if you wanted more information. It's very simple to Google Santa Clara County COVID-19, learn what to do, and you can find all the latest guidance. The general rules, though, for sports and recreational activities is that you may now engage in outdoor non-contact sports and recreational activities with members of your own household and no more than 1 additional household, as long as you maintain the 6 feet social distance from everyone from the other household and don't share equipment other than a ball, frisbee, or similar item with members of the other household. There is no use of recreational areas or facilities outside your home that have high-touch equipment or surfaces. And what that means for us is that our playgrounds, our picnic tables, our barbecues, our drinking fountains, and benches remain closed. There's no use of indoor recreational facilities like gyms, except for in your own home with members of your own household. And you must strictly comply to the social distancing requirements in the shelter-in-place order. Tennis, pickleball, basketball, and our playing fields are open with the social distancing and with up to 1 other household. All our restrooms are open. Our dog parks are open with limited capacity to the number of people who can occupy it while maintaining that 6-foot social distance. Foothills Toll Camp will open on July 8th, and all the open space parking lots are open. Once we open the parking lots, as I think many of you had heard at the previous commission meeting, and this remains true, visitation in open space is still quite high. I hope to have more data on how that compares to prior years in terms of the number of visitors. I don't have that at the hand right now, but I'll be bringing that to you soon. I also wanted to note that our one-way trails that we implemented both at Foothills and Arastradero to assist with social distancing have been successful. And on our website, you can find maps of those trails and details of where they're at. The city's ordinance requiring people to wear face coverings is still in effect, and the state also passed a face covering order on June 18th. And so we must follow those guidelines for face coverings, but you should note that you do not need to wear a face covering when you're exercising, but you do need to have one with you and ready to use. And just a recap of that June 5th order as it pertains to camps. These, you are allowed to have camps meet, and many, I'll just briefly explain a little bit that they expanded the use of city fields and provided opportunity to extend sports field participation. And the order allows for the one-on-one instruction of non-contact sports and allows for children to participate in sports-themed camps. And many of our city sports organizations have already begun to reach out to see how they can provide sports-themed camps and one-on-one instruction using city field space. These groups will provide to the city a signed affidavit which outlines how their camps meet the following guidelines. That is, the groups of 12 stay together for a minimum of 3 weeks. Adults can only interact with one group of 12 over that 3-week period, and kids can only participate in one group over the 3-week period. There's limited share of equipment and can only be used with that group of 12, and they've got to have that social distancing and no physical contact. I should note that this order does not allow formal sport practices or games. I want to provide a brief update on the Jmz project. It's coming along well. The building is substantially complete, and they're working on the punch list and have a temporary occupancy permit from the city to occupy the building so that they can quarantine animals. The zoo will be completed by the end of September. Very brief note on Cameron Park Community Meeting. You'll be hearing more about this subject from our landscape architect, Peter Jensen, who'll be presenting on it this evening. But there'll be a virtual community meeting this Thursday, July 2nd at 6:30 p.m. to discuss the Cameron Park Improvement Project. And if you would like to RSVP, you can email Jeanette Cerna. That's jeanette.cerna@cityofpaloalto.org. And there's also a project website that has all this information on how you can participate. And that concludes the department report.
Thank you, Darren. Do any commissioners have questions for Darren?
I have a couple. The Cubberley lease, how long is that lease, the duration of that?
Oh, forgive me. I don't believe I've got that information handy, but I can pull it up soon enough.
Okay. Just curious, if things change and we want to go back to the status quo, can we break that lease just with an agreement? If both sides agree, we can go back, or is there some reason that it would be stuck with this?
Almost all the city leases have some sort of exclusion or out, and I would imagine this does, but I can't speak definitively to that.
Okay. The second thing was the tide gate. I saw in the notes it was 41 weeks we're going to be closing the trail in the Baylands.
No, it's 41 months.
Almost 41 months.
Yeah, it's a 4-year project. And without looking at the map, which I highly recommend if you're interested that you do, because it gives the breakdown. But in essence, it's the area, a 0.5-mile section directly where the tide gate is located that would be closed for the entire duration of the project. It's the connection points of what's called Adobe Loop Trail, where there are portions that would be open.
So you no longer would be able to go from San Antonio all the way around that loop to Bixby.
That's correct. You'd have to take an alternative route.
And part of the reason for that is they can only do construction certain times of the year because of.
Yeah, once they tear out once they dewater and remove the existing tide gate and start constructing, it's unpassable for that section until they rebuild it.
Okay.
And so, yes, the construction is very, very narrow in terms of I think it's 4 months of the year that they do the work. But during the other parts, it bears the good question, can't we just pass through, or can't you put in some sort of portable trail or floating trail? They addressed that question in the meeting and said they could not.
Okay. I could see that could be dangerous and putting something like that in. It would be nice if we, at least during the times when we're not constructing, if we could use it, but I can see that being very difficult. Okay.
And I should note, during the non-construction time, you can come up to the site. So if you didn't, that would have closed like an additional 2.25 miles of trail on that Adobe section, Adobe Loop Creek. So you can come up to it, which extends some of your bike rides, but your point is well taken that it does stop you from making the complete loop on that section.
Thank you. It's good to see you back, Darren.
Thank you, sir.
One other thing, and that was the detour around it to go all the way from San Antonio to Bixby Park is to go along East Bayshore. And I was wondering when, now that they're doing the Highway 101 overcrossing, they're never going to block that off, are they?
You know, we made sure that we've got a connection point between our project leader, Mega Bunsel, and the Valley Water. So they're going to be connecting and making sure they're in communication to minimize any impacts.
Okay.
Anyone else? I have a couple comments. Again, on the Valley water closure, that's very disappointing news. had met with the engineers at a preliminary meeting a number of months back and voiced considerable concern about closing the trail, very popular trail, for such a long period of time. And it's very disappointing to hear that there isn't a way to structure the project so that the trail could be open at least some of those periods of time. And in the conversations I had with engineers, I was led to believe it might be a possibility. It's disappointing. The other comment is regarding the recruitment process for a new commissioner. Certainly, we're hopeful that we can get someone added as soon as possible and piggyback into the current open recruitment cycle. And maybe we can talk further about that if there's on that. Thank you. Appreciate the report, Darren, and absolutely, it's great to have you back.
Thank you very much.
I have one more comment.
Yes, David.
I am so happy that you were able to move people in the Coverly on the PAUSD side, find homes for them. I didn't think it was possible, but it sounds like you're very, very close, and that's fantastic news. I really appreciate it.
Lots of hard work from our director, Kristen O'Kane. I'll be sure to pass that on.
Right. Thank you. And then the JMZ, they said that they're going to open it to the public in March. So, and the animals are going to start moving over in October, but that they need the Coverly space till probably the end of the year. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And then at that time, it reverts back to the school district? Or do you
I'm not sure what the use will be, but yes, it would go back to some use between PUSD and the city for other purposes.
So the city might be able to use it?
I don't know for sure on that one. Yeah.
Okay. That's
Thank
all.
you. And I echo David's praise and congratulations that we've been able to find homes for all of the Coverly tenants. And I know it's a subject that's been very troubling to Kristen, and it's great that her perseverance has paid off. Any other comments before we move on in our agenda? Okay, then we'll get started with our first business item. Nope, sorry. The first business item is the approval of our minutes from the June 4th meeting. Does anyone have a motion? Does anyone have any comments or recommended corrections to the minutes? If not, could I have a motion to approve, please?
I so move.
Thank you, Keith. And a second?
A second.
Thank you, David. And we'll now have a vote. Everyone needs to vote verbally. Commissioner Rectal.
Yes.
Commissioner Moss.
Yes.
Commissioner Cribbs.
Yes.
Commissioner Byrd.
Olson, yes.
Oh, excuse me, I'm looking at your name on
My
the-
maiden name's still up there.
Sorry. My apologies. Commissioner Lemaire.
Yes.
Commissioner Moss. David, you're on mute, I think. In the meantime, I'm going to vote yes. And it seems we may have lost Commissioner Moss for the time being.
I'm back.
And do you vote to approve the minutes?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, the minutes are approved. Now, Darren, let's move on to our next business item, the update on the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. Darren, would you like to introduce our presenter, please? Darren, you're on mute.
I was really hoping I wouldn't make that mistake.
Yeah, I'll have my time.
I would like to introduce Christine Luong, who's a management analyst with the city manager's office in charge of sustainability. Thanks so much for being here, Christine.
Thank you for the opportunity. Just Okay. Good evening, Commissioners and Councilmember Koo. Thank you, Chair Greenfield, for the opportunity to share our work on the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. So in this presentation, we'll review the 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan potential goals and key actions for water and natural environment. You'll be hearing from Wendy Hedinger in a separate presentation on zero waste. In addition, you'll be hearing from Pam Boyle-Rodriguez next month on green stormwater infrastructure. And we hope tonight for Parks and Recreation Commission feedback on the goals and key actions before they go to AECOM for analysis. Our current Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which we excuse me, sometimes refer to as the SCAP, is made up of 3 components. The first being a goal of 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, calculated utilizing our 1990 baseline, the draft SCAP framework, and the 2018 to 2020 Sustainability Implementation Plan. Consistent with the Council's adoption of sustainability in the context of climate change as one of the top 3 priorities for calendar year 2020, staff is developing a 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan to help the city meet our sustainability goals, including our goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% below 1990 levels by 2030. So we've solicited community input on the first draft of the goals and key actions and have presented to Council, the Utilities Advisory Commission, and the Planning and Transportation Commission, and now we're presenting to Parks and Recreation Commission. So while all 7 areas are important, in this presentation, we're focusing on the water and natural environment areas, which are particularly interconnected. And I'd like to note that the sea level rise contract was approved by Council last week. So we'll be moving forward with our sea level rise vulnerability assessment and related public outreach. While our overarching sustainability goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030, calculating utilizing the 1990 baseline, we have several equally important goals in these following 7 areas. These are the team leads for the 7 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan areas, and the team leads for water, natural environment, and zero waste are here tonight to answer your questions. So the main sources of Palo Alto's greenhouse gases are very simple. About 1/3 comes from natural gas consumption in buildings, and about 2/3 from gasoline and diesel vehicles. This is a very familiar chart that we've showed many times. It shows our 2018 overall greenhouse gas emissions from both Palo Alto municipal operations and community-wide emissions in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, starting with our 1990 baseline, and then 2005 as a point of comparison. So by the end of 2018, Palo Alto reduced our greenhouse gas emissions an estimated 36% from the 1990 baseline, despite a population increase of 20% during that same time period. So as you can see, the red bar is road transportation, and that represents Palo Alto's largest remaining source of greenhouse gas emissions at about 64% of the remaining total, followed by the solid blue bar, which is natural gas, at about 32% of the remaining emissions. And the shaded blue bar represents Palo Alto green gas offsets. So as a bridging strategy, carbon offsets are being purchased in an amount equal to the greenhouse gas emissions caused by natural gas use within the city. But as you can see, natural gas use has not really changed in the past few years. So if we include natural gas offsets, greenhouse gas emissions are down about 56.5% from the 1990 baseline, and then road transportation accounts for about 94% of the remaining emissions. So we need about 300,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of additional reductions to meet our 80 by 30 goal. So now I'd like to turn to Walter Passmore, our urban forester, who has some late breaking news to share.
Thank you. We just wanted to share that this chart does not include quantification of sequestration for our natural environment. And we are currently in the process of awarding a contract to construct a tree canopy cover analysis tool so that we will be able to quantify the sequestration benefit of the urban forest throughout Palo Alto across all property lines.
Thank you, Walter. So as I mentioned previously, we solicited feedback from the community on the first draft of the goals and key actions through a virtual on-demand 2020 SCAP community engagement workshop, which included participation by members of the Parks and Recreation Commission. Thank you for attending that. Our sustainability website, and the April 13th council study session. The primary goal of our 2020 SCAP is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions towards our 2030 target. However, sustainability co-benefits can describe other desirable outcomes from our actions beyond greenhouse gas reductions. For example, actions designed to address climate change can also improve local air quality, provide regional benefits that extend beyond Palo Alto, or improve public health. So we're currently soliciting feedback on 8 potential co-benefits that are listed here, and those will be used to help with the impact analysis that is forthcoming. So turning to water, we incorporated the community input to update the 2020 SCAP potential goals and key actions, which will be the foundation for the eventual 2020 SCAP. So these are the potential goals for water: to exceed the forthcoming Making Conservation a California Way of Life indoor and outdoor water use targets by 5%. And this is based on new California regulations that will establish 2 usage targets for urban water suppliers, one for residential indoor use and one for the total irrigable land within an agency's service territory. The next goal is to achieve 10% of total water demand met by water reuse, either recycled or stormwater capture, to improve current recycled water by reducing total dissolved solids by 50% by 2024 compared to the 2019 base year, to increase pervious surfaces, which also includes treatment of how stormwater runs off within the city 10% by 2030 compared to the 2020 baseline, to manage stormwater by improving water quality to protect the San Francisco Bay and increase beneficial use of captured stormwater. The green stormwater infrastructure goals will be updated once additional quantification work is conducted over the next 3 years to provide accurate, realistic, and publicly vetted metrics. So there are 6 key actions for water. We've numbered them to make it easier to refer to, and they're not numbered based on priority. And I'm not going to read them in full, but to summarize the key actions, they are to maximize cost-effective water conservation and efficiency, expand the use of effluent from the Regional Water Quality Control Plant, increase implementation of green stormwater infrastructure, design and build a salt removal facility, develop a one water portfolio. I'd like to point out that a one water approach envisions managing all water in an integrated, inclusive, and sustainable manner that is more resilient to the impacts of climate change. The one water approach recognizes that water must be managed in ways that respect and respond to the natural flows of watersheds and the natural ecosystem, geology, and hydrology of an area. Projects and programs focus on achieving multiple benefits, including economic, environmental, and social. And then the final key action is to create streamlined design guidelines and permitting process for on-site potable and non-potable water reuse. These are the potential goals for natural environment. At the June council meeting, council directed staff to come up with a metric on biodiversity. Staff intends to work with stakeholders to create a biodiversity index specific to Palo Alto. And we welcome the Commission's thoughts on this topic. So the goals are to reduce and enhance resilience and biodiversity of our natural environment, and increase tree canopy to 40% citywide coverage by 2030. There are 9 key actions for natural environment. These are numbered again to make it easier to refer to and not based on any priority. And the summary of the 9 key actions are to explore programs and policies to provide carbon sequestration and other environmental benefits, to maximize biodiversity and soil health, coordinate implementation of various plans through the city's internal sustainability leadership team, expand the requirements of the water efficient landscape ordinance, implement the green stormwater infrastructure plan. And again, staff will be providing a more in-depth GSI presentation to you next month. Ensure no net tree canopy loss for all projects. Identify opportunities to further reduce and eliminate the use of pesticides. Include native plants and pollinator-friendly plant landscaping with all park capital improvement projects, and establish a baseline for carbon storage of tree canopy. So for next steps, AECOM is creating a citywide greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 2019, including providing a more accurate methodology for calculating our transportation-related emissions, which will include airport emissions for the first time in accordance with new reporting protocols. AECOM will also calculate a business as usual forecast to show what emissions reductions will be achieved if we don't add any new policies or actions. As I mentioned, we've sought input from the Utility Advisory Commission and Planning and Transportation Commission, and we're looking for your feedback tonight. We'll be returning to next month to present on green stormwater infrastructure. And I would like to note, the Parks and Recreation Commission is the only group focusing on water, natural environment, sea level rise, and zero waste. So we really hope for your comments on those areas with a specific focus on water and natural environment right now, and then zero waste in the next presentation. Then AECOM will work on an impact analysis on the draft key actions to estimate the greenhouse gas reduction of the potential actions, the estimated costs, and the additional sustainability co-benefits. We're currently soliciting feedback from the community on the co-benefits through a virtual public forum. We're also making note of the feedback from the first 2020 SCAP webinar to improve our community engagement and webinars moving forward. And the results of the AECOM impact analysis will help us further refine the goals and key actions needed to get us to our 80 by 30 emissions reduction target. And we hope to present a package of options to Council in the fall. I'd like to thank Chair Greenfield for providing very detailed comments on the first draft of the 2020 SCAP goals and key actions. We've taken those comments into consideration for the updated goals and key actions, and we're hoping for more feedback from the Parks and Recreation Commission. These are our suggested questions for discussion at this study session, and we're here available for your questions, and we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Christine, for the presentation. I know this is just the tip of the iceberg that you're presenting in a very condensed form, and represents a very small snapshot into the many hours that you dedicated to working on the overall sustainability picture and plan for our community. And thank you for all of your efforts in the community workshop and the outreach. Commissioner, do we have any comments? Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak before? I'm not getting any indication of that. Do we need, before we
Yeah, no one has their hands up on the attendees.
Before we go into any specific questions, do any commissioners have general questions about the presentation? David, go ahead.
So this presentation is very near and dear to my heart. There are many, many things that resonate with what the Park Commission has been talking about over the past years. And I don't see anything missing. But I mean, we have the sea level rise project out at the Baylands. We have the urban forest canopy increase. We have the purple pipes and the recycling of water for irrigation for the parks. We are working very hard with the green stormwater people to do with pervious concrete in our parks and bioswales. We have the Buckeye Creek project, which is stormwater initiative. And it would be nice if we did it by 2030. We have the natural environment resilience has everything to do with taking care of our open spaces and our parks to make sure that they're not overused. And as far as zero waste, I didn't quite realize that our commission was the only one looking at zero waste. Certainly, we're dealing with grass clippings and tree prunings, but I didn't realize that we run the hazardous waste center, or that we or the recycle center. That's news to me, but certainly what we do with our grass clippings and tree prunings. And then as far as biodiversity, having that discussion last meeting with the or 2 meetings ago about the pollinator islands and the growing of native plants in those islands and medians on the roads. We should definitely try to come up with a metric, maybe number of square feet of additional drought tolerant plants that we come up with. And of course, Darren has spoken many times about pesticide use and about reducing the amount of water used by parks. And so there's a whole lot of things that are in there that I'm very happy to see. I really can't find anything missing. So that's a good thing. Okay. You're on mute, Jeff.
I muted myself just before I talked, just so I can make everyone else feel better when they do it. Thank you. So I guess we're moving on to specific or general comments. Commissioner Olson, would you like to comment?
Could we redisplay the key actions? Since I think that's where we were looking for the most feedback.
Sorry, it's a little delayed here. Okay. Would you like to start with water or natural environment?
Water would be great, I think. There was another slide that had values, I think, something like that. And the last one was increasing affordability. I think it was earlier on in your presentation. I had a question about, oh, right there, reduce cost of living through cost savings. How do we imagine that manifesting as a co-benefit?
That is a great question. I should have been more clear that these are the 8 possible co-benefits, and we might not end up with all of these depending on the feedback we get from the community on what's important to them. But right now we're envisioning that the cost of living would be related to sort of reducing the cost of living through utility cost savings, for example, or travel cost savings. Like if we build more houses next to transit, for example, then people would save time and money on their commutes and therefore have some sort of benefits with their cost of living. So things like that is what we're envisioning by what we mean for reducing cost of living through cost savings.
Okay, great. And then can we go back to the key values? Okay, there was the water goals one. And then, oh, key actions are there. So Facility. Okay, I don't think I have any questions on this one. I think I agree with Commissioner Moss. I think this has been very inclusive and very thorough and very impressive. The only other question I had was on the comment about the canopy and maybe recapturing some of the benefits from the canopy that we have. Could you describe that a little bit more? And are we going to be able to track that over the years, or will it just kind of be like, we know what it is today, but we don't know what it used to be?
Sure. I'm going to ask Walter Passmore to answer that, since he can do a better job than I can.
Thank you. So when we construct the tool for canopy cover analysis, that will be part of our Esri GIS system. So every year when we get updated imagery, the tool will automatically analyze that and be able to recalculate the benefits. So we'll get an annual update on the carbon benefit and the co-benefits of the urban forest.
And then do we have any historical data on that we could compare to what it used to be, or will it be like from today forward that we'll have that data?
So we do. We have 2 points in time that have already been analyzed, 1982 and 2010. So that analysis is already complete. I think it'll be timely to complete the analysis this year, because we'll be able to compare 2010 to 2020 and see how far we've come in the last 10 years.
Great. And then on the tree canopy increasing to 40%, that means we want 40% more than we have today, correct?
No, 40% of the city would be covered in trees. Currently,
Oh, got it.
we're a little bit over 38%, and 40% may not seem like a very optimistic goal, but Palo Alto has one of the most vibrant urban forests in the state of California. So even increasing a nominal amount is a fairly optimistic task.
Does that include private yards and things, or only public spaces?
Yes, both, because our residents get the benefit of trees wherever they are. It doesn't matter if they're on public or private property.
Got it. Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. I think this is a really terrific plan.
Thank you. Commissioner Lemaire?
I appreciate the work put into this plan and the detail, and also echo the sentiments of the previous commissioner's comments. My one question is, as we go through with this plan and trying to reduce our emissions and everything we're doing, are we doing this also in lockstep or as a coalition with neighboring governments, city governments, in terms of, certainly we can do everything we can and should do everything we can to reduce our pollutants, but we also will be affected by our neighbors. And do we have conversations with them and try to have similar goals?
That's a great question. And yes, there are several regional efforts to coordinate our work and share ideas. We don't coordinate specifically on what is going in each other's climate action plans necessarily. However, I do know that, for example, Menlo Park is currently also updating their climate action plan, and we have a lot of similarities in our plans and similar goals and key actions. So we're relatively aligned. There is a climate change task force that Palo Alto participates in. There's also other in the issue-specific areas, there are regional efforts there as well. So, for example, with sea level rise, there are a lot of regional efforts around sea level rise because the water doesn't care about geographic boundaries. It's just going to rise. And we have to coordinate with our neighbors on that.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you have any other comments or questions?
No, that was my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is very good. This is good stuff. Thank you for your time. Let's start at, well, I have a couple questions for Walter. The slide 11. They said no net canopy loss. And so if, let's say someone is remodeling their house and they cut down a big tree, does that mean, what time frame do they have to have no loss? Do they have to have it as soon as it's done, plant enough trees to get the same canopy that they had before, or say plant the tree such that in 3 or 5 years it gets back to the original canopy?
So on a project basis, we allow 15 years for that restoration to occur. And that can be a combination of planting additional trees on site and planting off-site or paying in lieu fees.
Oh, interesting. Okay. You buy this on the secondary market?
We do have a internal forestry fund that plants trees, and we've been using that money to plant new trees in South Palo Alto specifically, where we have less tree canopy.
Oh, so all this, if I pay the in lieu cost, then you turn around, you plant that in the urban part of Palo Alto?
Correct.
Okay. So that is an apples to apples, as opposed to planting it up in the foothills somewhere. That would be a little different. So on slide 9, we talk about the allocation, the increased tree canopy to 40%. What is it right now?
About 38.5, our last estimate, but we'll find out a more exact number when our canopy cover analysis tool is complete, hopefully the end of this calendar year.
Okay, and that is, what area is considered? Is that just urban Palo Alto, or is that all of Palo Alto proper?
Just urban Palo Alto.
Okay. And so the parks then, do you know what the canopy is on parks? We've broken that out.
We have not differentiated parks, but once we construct the canopy cover analysis tool, we will be able to separate specific areas. So we could separate all the urban parks and calculate canopy cover on each one.
Oh, that'd be interesting. And then would we have some bogey that we would have to meet? We'd want to get 40% in our parks, or would we want something higher in our parks? Have we talked about that at all?
I don't think we've talked about canopy cover target for parks specifically, but that might be a great subject for the Parks and Recreation Commission to tackle.
Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that it's easier to plant trees in parks than it would be in a private lot, just because you have a house there, and that may be difficult. Whereas in the parks, you don't have nearly as much competition for the land. I guess you do have athletic fields and things, but. Okay, what about preserves, both the open space and Foothills Park? Do we have any goals to increase the canopy there?
Only nominally. We want to simulate as closely as possible the historic ecology of those areas. And, Darren could probably speak to that better than I can, but there's only a few areas where we feel that we want to restore tree canopy where it's not currently present.
Darren,
Just to add on to what Walter had just shared, I think a good example would be the re-oaking that we did in Pearson Rastadero Reserve as part of the golf course project, where we tried to save and establish as many oak trees as possible, is a good example of a fairly large scale endeavor to re-tree. The other one that jumps out at me is a necessity is for us to be on top of sods losses and making sure we protect as much as possible our heritage oaks throughout the foothills region.
how many oaks did we plant in Rastadero Preserve?
I believe it was 600 and change that were not necessarily planted, but protected. That is, a naturally occurring oak that popped up was protected, so it would make it to adulthood.
Oh, so we didn't necessarily plant those. We just
No.
Okay.
Some were planted, and through our partnership with Grassroots Ecology, but many were free growing and they were protected.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all for Walter. Thanks. I have a question on slide 5. Okay, I noticed that one of the elements was landfill unrecovered recyclables. That is the greenhouse gases that were used to produce the recyclables, or is this?
No, those are the greenhouse gases that are emitted from the recyclables that can't be reused somehow. It's just the off-gassing.
Oh, yeah, okay, it is off-gassing. And then what's the next one under that? The life cycle emissions from annual waste placed in landfill?
Yes. So that one, I don't know if Wendy can speak to that better than I can, but that also has to do with landfill-related emissions from just natural occurring emissions from the waste.
The outgassing from all the food containers and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the life cycle emissions from the annual total waste placed in landfill is the emissions that happen in the landfill from the landfill waste, but the landfill unrecovered recyclables, I believe, is more of an upstream emission. So the emissions that because we didn't recycle those items, like if we throw away an aluminum can or glass and new ones have to be made, there's a lot more emissions from making it from natural resources than it is if we make it from recycled material. So we were trying to capture those upstream emissions.
Okay. I mean, so that's off-site. That's not necessarily occurring in Palo Alto.
Correct. It's correct. It's just occurring because of the actions that we.
Palo Alto.
Correct.
And so if I eat a tomato in Palo Alto, do we book the greenhouse gases that were used to raise that tomato? Or did we draw the line?
We don't do that. We just looked at the garbage. Like if you threw that tomato away and didn't eat it, then we were taking those numbers. And
oh, I see your point. The fact that it's a lost opportunity that we didn't recycle.
And we were really, when we looked at the unrecovered recyclables, we really were looking at, I believe it was more, not organics, but recyclables. So aluminum and glass, plastics. And I believe the counting has changed for this new year. I think they've taken that out. And Christine can talk to that more than I can.
Yeah, so we, up until this year, Palo Alto Utilities has been calculating most of our greenhouse gas inventories. And this year we decided that we need to follow what's called the GPC protocol more closely. So AECOM will be doing our 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and we're going to review all of the changes in the GPC protocol and look at how we've done the inventories in the past and make any corrections as needed.
Okay, thank you. The horizontal line there with the green arrow, that's just for is that for everything, or is that just for the road travel?
No, that horizontal line is where we need to get down to for everything.
For everything. And what time frame do we have to get down there?
In 10 years, by 2030.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's pretty aggressive. And I noticed, like on slide 7, there's some other aggressive numbers.
Yes.
How likely is it that we're going to hit those?
That's a great question. It depends on, I'm going to forward to a slide that I have in my back pocket. So it really depends on so the spectrum of level of intervention. So right now, we've mostly focused on the low intervention voluntary market-driven solutions that can only really get you so far. We've also done some interventions in the middle column, like our energy reach code ordinance, council ordinances, things like that. The one area that we haven't done much or anything in is the higher intervention, the government-driven solutions. Those will require citywide voter-approved mandates or financing and utility-scale infrastructure shifts. So it really depends if we. So our consultant, AECOM, is going to estimate the greenhouse gas reduction potential, costs, and co-benefits. And that impact analysis will give us a range of the costs per greenhouse gas reductions for each of the key actions. And then we'll have various options along this spectrum of tools to get to our 80 by 30 goal. So at some point, we're going to have to decide, like, how many high intervention strategies are we going to employ to get us to 80 by 30? Or the question might be, do we need true emissions reductions to get to 80 by 30? Or are we going to do a combination of true emissions reductions and continue our offsets program to get to 80 by 30, and then do true emissions reductions by 2040 or something like that? So those, after the impact analysis, once we return to council, we're going to have to come up with the different scenarios and different packages of options for how aggressively we want to be to get to 80 by 30, or if we want to sort of be not quite as aggressive and give ourselves more time.
Very good. That's a good answer. You put a lot of thought into this. Why do they call it 80 by 30?
Oh, sorry. It's because we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2030.
Oh, okay.
So the shorthand 80 by 30.
Okay. And I'd one last question about the salt removal facility at the waste treatment center. That would be on site right now at the current location?
I believe so. It would be at the Regional Water Quality Control Plant.
Okay, so we wouldn't have to have any additional land for that. It would be on site. Okay, and the reason for that is to allow more recyclable water to be used?
Correct. I believe so, yes.
It's
Okay.
to improve the water quality for our existing recycled water customers, since our TDS is rather high, and it would be dropping it about by half. And
Okay.
it would be on the existing recycled water plant facility.
Okay, excellent. That's what I wanted to know. It's because our TDS prevents us from using it some places. So, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Ann?
Yeah, thank you very much. Christine, thank you. This is excellent. I really appreciate all the work that you and all the other people have done. I want to thank Commissioner Lemaire for asking the question about what are we doing with our neighbors. And I'm glad to hear that we have some committees and some work that are going on. So we're sharing best practices, and it'll be fun to know more about that in the future and kind of keep track of that. So I'm glad you asked that question, Jeff. I have two general questions. One is about community engagement as one of the goals, I believe, and one of the actions. I don't unlike Keith, I don't have the numbers of the slides. But can you talk a little bit about what, how you've done community engagement and how you will continue to reach out to the community, and if you are including the youth of our community in getting feedback from them?
Great question. So yeah, so we, our community engagement efforts were turned upside down because of coronavirus. We were supposed to have our first in-person community engagement workshop on March 31st, which obviously couldn't happen because shelter in place started on March 16th. So we scrambled and redid it as a 8-part virtual workshop with the first workshop being sort of a general overview of the 2020 SCAP update, and then the remaining 7 workshops on each of the specific areas. And we had 204 people attend that workshop. We did a really big push to try to reach a broad audience, and half of the people who attended had never attended a sustainability or climate change related event run by the city of Palo Alto before. So that was great. And we yeah, it was fantastic. And we had a Palo Alto youth group that participated, and they wrote some very, very thoughtful comments. So I had originally planned on partnering with the sustainability manager at Palo Alto Unified School District, but unfortunately her position was eliminated. So I'm going to probably have to rethink that and continue working with the Palo Alto youth group that has been so engaged. I had done a presentation at Stanford a while back, and met with some of the students afterwards who are all involved in what's called, I think it's the Sunrise movement. So I've been in communications with them as well.
Yeah, that's really great to hear on all fronts. I think there's so many thoughtful high school students in Palo Alto, as we've been hearing as they've been talking to the council about other things, and also thoughtful students who are actually making this their life's work over at Stanford. And so we're really lucky to be in a place with so many resources, but it's great that you're doing all that. Thank you very, very much for talking about that. And I'm feeling like that's maybe one of the places that the commission could be helpful to try to continue to engage the community and be encouraging about being involved with this very, very important topic. So that would be a recommendation to my fellow commissioners. And then on my final question is on the slide. Again, I don't know the number. It was in a list that said equity, and I believe it was above the saving money. Yes. Would you give an example of address existing inequity that's referring to? Just a pretty simple example.
Sure, of course. So that would be things like disproportionate poor air quality. If certain neighborhoods have poor air quality for whatever reason, if there's an industrial center there, or access to transit. So Midtown, for example, has fewer access points to transit than the rest of the city. Flood risk, there's certain homes that are much more at risk for sea level rise and floods. And you could also, equity could also be like South Palo Alto doesn't have as many trees, the tree canopy is sparser there. So all sorts of things related to equity.
Great. Well, I'm really glad to see that. I congratulate you for adding that to the list. So thank you for doing that. And those are all my questions. But
thank you, Ann, and thank you, Christine. Thank you for putting all this together. Thank you for your efforts. The virtual workshop was an awesome effort, and I know, as you alluded to, it was a significant redirect on how to pull this off, and I think you did a great job with that. I wanted to ask, is the workshop still available for viewing, or is it still applicable? Or if it's not applicable, would it be appropriate to update it in the future and make it accessible?
That is a great question. So we used GoToWebinar to do those workshops, and we had a free 3-month COVID package for cities, which just expired last week. So the online versions of those workshops are no longer available. I did download all the workshops, so we have them. That said, we are planning on doing new workshops with updated information. So we are currently working on our engagement strategy for the next round now that we've updated the first draft of the goals and key actions, and we have our second draft. So our current thinking is that we want to put together some more issue-specific webinars focused on the areas that had the most comments from the first round. So things like what does it really mean to electrify your home? Another thing that came up a lot was carbon sequestration from the natural environment. So we want to have some additional topic-specific webinars, follow that up with more online engagement opportunities, and then culminate. We had originally planned on having an in-person SCAP summit, but the way things are going, it looks like we probably won't be able to have an in-person anything for a long time. So we're trying to figure out, can we do some sort of like virtual town hall or something to get more people involved and feedback on the final packages of options.
That's great, thanks. And I know it must be very rewarding in the general feedback from the people who self-select to be engaged in this. Their comments are really very, they get it. They get the urgency, the need for effective tracking and appropriate measurement, et cetera. I have some comments. The co-benefits slide and the spectrum benefits slide, those were great. I think those were helpful and useful. On the natural environment, I have a question about the salt removal facility. It seems like that's a fairly high cost solution, and I'm wondering what percentage of planned costs that represents versus percentage of potential reduction.
Sorry, do you want to clarify that question exactly how you're trying to, the cost of the facility is actually majorities coming from Valley Water from the agreement that we signed with Valley Water in December. So we project it's about a $20 million facility and approximately $16 million is going to be coming from Valley Water. And since Mountain View receives majority of the recycled water from that facility, they'll be paying about 3/4 and Palo Alto will be paying about 1/4 of the $4 million that's left. So it's actually not costing us that much money. The energy cost to produce recycled water is going to be higher because it is RO concentrate, reverse osmosis, and there is higher energy demands there, but to produce and blend is better than using potable water.
Thank you for the clarification. That makes
Sure.
it much easier to feel good about that. On the and I'm sorry, that was on the water side. On the natural environment side, I've never been shy about being a fan of trees and all the great work that our urban forestry department does. So that's great work to hear that the sequestration analysis is coming soon. And the commission has been looking to formalize our relationship with the urban forestry department. We continue to support that. And I appreciate Keith's comment about looking to consider the canopy coverage in parks separately, and I think we can certainly be helpful with that. Walter, could you comment on the process if a Palo Alto resident wants to add a tree on his private property, what the community support or what the city support for that is?
We do have some cooperative programs that we fund through Canopy, our nonprofit. And in part, those are funded through the forestry fund that I mentioned, the in lieu fees from development projects that can't plant replacement trees during the project. In part, those come from the general fund, and we're also exploring other potential future funding sources. You know, for example, San Francisco passed a substantial bond measure to increase their tree canopy cover.
That's great. And so just to highlight it, if people want to plant a tree, they can contact Canopy and see how the city, they maybe get city support for that through Canopy.
Correct. There is a level of assistance for some properties to plant new trees.
That's great. And I appreciate that the nominal, the increase from 38 or 38.5% to 40% is not nominal, and it does take some effort. What you mentioned also kind of segues well into my next question, which is the opportunity to get support for our implementation of our master plans through additional grant writing. And my question for anyone, perhaps Christine, is, you know, how much effort or how much staff time goes into pursuing this free money that's out there? And this is not the first time that this body has raised the question and encouraging that we should be doing more of this.
Yes, I remember that comment that you wrote very well. Right now, I mean, I personally don't spend very much time researching grants or writing grants, mostly because I don't have the bandwidth. But I know certain departments do spend a lot of time. I know, for example, the Office of Transportation, they have regularly, I think, monthly meetings to review all the potential funding opportunities. I'm not sure what other departments do. It's really a departmental by departmental basis.
Thank you. I continue to think that it's an opportunity, and certainly I appreciate the budget process and the pressures on staff right now. But this may even be an area where contracting outside work to pursue grants could be a cost-effective solution, because we've got these great urban forestry and parks and open space master plans with all kinds of ideas and programs waiting for implementation and lacking funding. I understand staff resource to support the funding is an issue as well, but if we had more money, we would be in a position to figure out how to use it. Thank you. I just wanted to also point out that mobility is an issue that's dear to the hearts of the Parks and Rec Commission, and we're very interested in supporting the pathways between parks and other areas in the community, as well as schools, and supporting biking and recreation throughout the community. I'm not sure you got so much direct answers to your question on the biodiversity metrics that you posed, and I think there's a difficult area. But maybe you could highlight a little bit more what your current approach is in working with regional experts and resources like San Francisco Estuary Institute for developing metrics, and maybe you could comment on the prioritization between plant and wildlife. Was equally prioritized, or is a little different based on the metrics available?
Sure. I think that I will turn this question over to Walter, because he's been doing a lot more work, direct work on it.
So we have just started researching the topic, but I think that we've identified a good foundation to work from, which is the California Biodiversity Initiative. There's been a task force of scientists that came together to identify, different measures of biodiversity and come up with a way to look across the entire ecosystem and establish biodiversity health measures. I envision this being more of a scale of, degraded to ideal, and trying to assess where are we now and where do we want to be in the future. So we've just started this effort. I think it's potentially something that we could work on for a long time, and adapt over time as we make progress.
And how is this applied? How is this applied differently to suburban areas versus baylands areas or foothills, open space areas?
Right. Obviously, it's going to be nuanced. We're going to need to involve our constituent groups, and I think the Parks and Recreation Commission could be a key participant in fine-tuning the biodiversity index to fit Palo Alto.
That's great. I think I can speak for the commission in saying we're looking for ways that we can support the overall sustainability effort, whether it's using the body as a conduit for community input and feedback, whether it's outreach to community with specific programs they can help with. Please let us know how we can help.
I had one quick comment regarding that, and that is that, are you using that imagery from 1982 and 2010 to look at areas of monoculture like green grass or concrete, to see, are we reducing the amount of concrete and green grass at a similar rate that we're increasing the canopy? Can you use those same diagrams for that?
So that analysis was specific to trees. We did not analyze any other features. With our new GIS system, we would be able to analyze additional features. So if there are interest in analyzing the amount of impervious surface or the amount of grass as compared to bushes or trees, those divisions are possible with the new enterprise GIS system.
Yeah, I'm thinking specifically of like the Cal Ave parking structure. Can they put vines up the side of the structure instead of concrete? And can they put plants and trees in pots on the top layer of the parking structure? That kind of thing, to reduce the amount of concrete and measure it.
Some of those things are being done. And one of the improvements that we're making with the GIS system is we'll be able to track those landscape improvements on a project by project basis. And so that will be information that you can analyze over time.
Thank you. Any other questions any follow-up questions from other commissioners?
Actually, one more question, and that is, why don't we add Buckeye Creek to this? If we're going to spend $20 million to take salt out of the water and another $20 million to take solids out of the water, why don't we do Buckeye Creek, which will significantly reduce the amount of dirt and runoff into the creeks, which eventually run into the bay? I would think it would be just as important, and it only costs $9 million, and we could do it in the next 5 to 10 years. That's a question for Darren.
Well, I don't know what to say, Commissioner Moss, other than I support that idea. Well, I think we just continue those conversations. I think that's a fair thing to say. Thank you for that.
It's a funding issue and an assessment issue. Where does it contribute and where can we get the funding from?
Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, Christine and Walter and Karin and all of your supporting staff for this enlightening presentation. We're very supportive and want to continue to work with you and the community. Sustainability as a goal doesn't go away during the COVID-19 times. It continues on, and we need to continue it as understanding it's a priority and continue actively working to address it. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to continuing our sustainability speaker series. Darren, would you like to introduce our next presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce Wendy Hediger. She's environmental specialist with Public Works Zero Waste. And we'll just give Wendy a second to pull up her presentation. Thank you, Wendy.
Excuse me, actually, before Wendy jumps in, I apologize. Councilmember Koo, did you have anything you wanted to add? Good, thank you. Well, welcome, Wendy. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right, can you hear me? Am I on? Yeah. Can you see my slide?
We can.
Very good. All right, thank you very much, and good evening. So tonight I will be talking about zero waste in Palo Alto, and specifically our 2018 Zero Waste Plan, Zero Waste in the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, and a few of our zero waste efforts in parks and open space. So I'll hit a few different topics. So to start off, in 2005, City Council adopted the goal of zero waste. The goal is to achieve zero waste. However, knowing that achieving zero waste is very difficult, the metric of 90% diversion of waste from landfills by 2021 was adopted. In 2016, as part of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, Council adopted a more aggressive goal of 95% diversion by 2030. In addition to these goals, we also need to comply with state mandates. So California has a goal of 75% of the waste created needs to be recycled, composted, or source reduced, which means not created in the first place, by 2020. The state created requirements for mandatory commercial recycling and composting to help attain this goal. Palo Alto also created recycling and composting requirements. In 2016, Council adopted the Recycling and Composting Ordinance, requiring everyone in Palo Alto to recycle and compost. There's no enforcement for residents. This ordinance is aimed at the commercial sector, requiring them to have recycle and compost service and to sort their waste properly. It also creates a uniform color-coded system throughout Palo Alto so that if you're at home, at work, at school, or at play, in the parks, for instance, waste sorting is the same. So we have a uniform system. So zero waste doesn't simply mean recycling and composting all of our waste. We can't recycle our way to zero waste. It's certainly part of the solution, but it's only one tool in the toolbox. Zero waste is a holistic approach to managing materials in a closed loop system or circular economy, where there's no such thing as waste. Discards are either designed out completely or fed back into the production cycle as raw material. Palo Alto's 2018 diversion rate is 82%. So that's our most current rate. We usually have the 2019 or the next year's numbers by now, but things are a little delayed this year. It's good to note here that diversion includes all waste prevention, so not making the waste in the first place, reuse, recycling, and composting activities. It's kind of lumps all of those things together. So the 2018 Zero Waste Plan updates the first such plan for Palo Alto, which was adopted in 2007. The new plan contains new and revised actions designed to meet the aggressive goals adopted by City Council in 2016 as part of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, namely 95% diversion of materials from landfills by 2030 and the 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by the same year. Before we could determine what new actions were necessary to attain our goals, we needed to find out what was still in our garbage. So this pie chart shows the total tons of waste being landfilled by Palo Alto in 2016. Approximately 44% of what Palo Alto sent to the landfill came from construction and demolition projects. Although construction and demolition projects have a high diversion rate, in 2016 it was 72% overall, the 28% they do send to landfill accounts for 44% of the total amount of waste landfilled by Palo Alto. So construction and demolition waste would obviously need to be addressed in the new Zero Waste Plan. So we conducted a waste characterization study in 2017 for the non-construction related waste, so the gray side of the previous chart. The chart we have here shows what was thrown in the garbage by residents and businesses. It does not include what was placed in the recycle or compost carts. So approximately 67% of what is being thrown away in the garbage in Palo Alto can be currently recycled or composted. The 2017 waste characterization study determined not only what we were throwing out, but also who was throwing it out and in what quantity. This level of detail is important when developing a plan. For example, here's a list of the top 6 materials found in the garbage from both residents and businesses. Edible food scraps tops the list. That's food that could have been eaten. It's a slice of pizza, a whole apple, a chunk of cheese, etc. But it was thrown away for some reason. Perhaps it got lost in the back of the fridge and spoiled, or someone didn't want to eat leftovers, or a cook burnt it and it couldn't be sold. These are all what we call edible food waste. So it may not be edible when it was thrown away, it's spoiled, but it could have been eaten. So food waste prevention efforts would need to be included in the new plan for these items. We want to reduce this waste from happening to save not only food from being wasted, but also all the resources that went into creating the food, the water, the energy, etc. So we want people to eat the food that they purchase. The second item on the list is inedible food scraps. These are pits, peels, cores, shells, things you wouldn't traditionally eat. These are items that should have been composted. So the plan would need to also address improved sorting. The 2017 waste characterization study is available on our website at zerowastepaloalto.org if you'd like to dive into all the details. So using the waste characterization data and information gathered from community engagement efforts, we developed the 2018 Zero Waste Plan. It includes 48 initiatives or actions to be taken to achieve zero waste and the 95% diversion goal. The plan includes refinement of existing programs, the adoption of new policies and programs, working with manufacturers to redesign products, and working with businesses and residents that are purchasing products that will eventually become waste. The plan is divided into short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions. If you would like to read the plan, please go to cityofpaloalto.org/ZW plan. So shifting to the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, zero waste is an integral component of climate protection. Approximately 42% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are associated with the flow of materials through the economy, from the extraction or harvest of materials in food, production and transport of goods, provision of services, reuse of materials, recycling, composting, and to disposal. The flow of these resources contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, which is why reducing waste is an important strategy for both greenhouse gas reductions and overall sustainability. So the goals in the Zero Waste chapter of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan are no surprise. They mirror our zero waste goal and how we will achieve it. That's implementing the zero waste plan. So we pulled out these high priority actions from the 2018 Zero Waste Plan for inclusion as key actions in the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. Starting July 1st, my goodness, it's tomorrow, demolition will no longer be allowed. Instead, projects that wish to remove a whole structure will need to carefully disassemble the building's components to maximize reuse and recycling. This current requirement only covers a small percentage of projects. To achieve zero waste, the ordinance will need to be expanded to include more projects. The next key action focuses on single-use disposable foodware. Using reusables conserves natural resources, decreases our carbon footprint, and reduces pollution. Palo Alto already prohibits the use of plastic straws, utensils, stir sticks, drink plugs, produce bags, and other disposable plastic items. To achieve zero waste, the ordinance will need to be expanded to single-use disposable cups and containers. So edible food is the biggest single material type disposed in our garbage. So this next key action focuses on the commercial sector, requiring them to practice waste prevention by not creating excess edible food in the first place. It also focuses on recovering the excess edible food that they do generate for human consumption. The fourth key action listed is about residential food waste reduction. So 26% of the residential garbage, so what's thrown in the garbage can, is composed of food that could have been eaten but went bad and was thrown away. This initiative is to have the city learn why Palo Alto residents waste food and then create outreach and programs to help them reduce that amount. The next key action addresses diapers, which comprise 16% of all residential discards, or 7% of citywide discards. It ranked as one of the top 6 material types in our waste stream. And for the last key action listed, some examples of ways to champion waste prevention are provide waste prevention technical assistance for businesses, provide waste reduction grants, promote the adoption of a zero waste lifestyle, and promote access to goods over ownership. So, for example, a rental or sharing of items in the community. So those are our key actions for zero waste. So changing gears to zero waste parks, I want to share this with you. For the past year and a half, Zero Waste in Parks and Open Space have been collaborating on several projects to create an environment easier for park goers to practice zero waste, to get them in alignment with our recycling and composting ordinance as well. So the goals of these projects are to create easily identifiable, color-coded 3 sorts waste stations with signs to indicate what goes where, and remove unneeded waste receptacles to increase efficiency. So for example, previously Hoover Park had many unlabeled bins that only provided park goers the choice to throw away materials into the landfill or recycle container. But what were people to do with their compostable material? Another issue was illegal dumping in carts located at the front of the park. So in order to rectify the issue, we reorganized the bins into waste stations and placed them in the locations that generated the most waste. The stations are color-coded and include signage to guide the user on how to separate their waste properly. The carts at the front area of the park were removed to deter illegal dumping. So this effort was successful, so it was replicated in other parks as well. At Ramos Park, Mitchell Park, Bull Park, and this park was just completed a couple weeks ago, and at Rinconada Park. So at Rinconada, we decided to run a 1-year pilot to test more efficient ways to achieve zero waste in parks. The pilot consisted of removing 44 waste receptacles from the park and creating 4 large waste stations, which were centrally located, accessible to park users and maintenance staff, and easily serviceable by Green Waste, our contracted hauler. So during the pilot, we evaluated the waste to see what kind of changes would occur. Here are some pre-pilot photos. The photos depicted on the top of the slide were from the compost, and the photos from the bottom of the slide were from the recycle. You can see that the material doesn't look different, right? People were throwing whatever they had in their hand into the nearest bin, so it was not well sorted. Here are some photos from the pilot. The two photos from the top are from the compost container, and the bottom two are from the recycling. Now you can see better sorting. There's food scraps and soil paper in the compost. There are bottles and cans and recyclable paper in the recycling. Sorting isn't perfect, but it's definitely improved. And please note here, pizza boxes belong in the compost, so that's a missort. The pilot is now over and was deemed successful. There's been an increase, or a decrease rather, in illegal dumping, litter, and contamination. Additionally, Parks contractor has been freed up to perform other duties since they no longer need to service the 44 individual waste cans. So Parks is currently considering having a similar setup at some of the other parks where it makes sense. So this is my last slide. Our current project, which is almost finished now, is one we're working on with open space in the Baylands. The park rangers removed 43 old concrete landfill containers and replaced them with 15 pet waste receptacles and 10 waste stations. All the pet waste receptacles have been installed and are currently in use. Most of the waste stations were recently installed. I believe we have one more that is still on its way. And it's my understanding that Cameron Park is the next on the list to be upgraded, and that will happen as part of its CIP project. So that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you all for your time and open it up for questions.
Wendy, thank you very much for joining us and giving us this great information and for all the successful efforts. It's really inspiring. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions first? I don't see any hands up. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? No. Okay, so let's go on to commissioner comments and questions. Anybody wishing to go first?
I can go.
Go ahead, Keith.
Okay. You talked about the sorting of the waste. The smart station down in Sunnyvale. Can you talk about the sorting that they do down there?
Sure. So our garbage goes down to the Sunnyvale smart station, where it does go over a sorting line so they can pull out recyclables that get into the garbage, and they also pull out some of the organic materials. However, we want to sort out as much as possible on the front end so that Smart can pull out everything else. Because right now, if you do look at our waste characterization study, we sort the residuals that are coming from Smart. And there's still quite a bit of recyclables left in what goes to landfill, just because it's just a lot for them to deal with. So the more we can pull out on the front end, the more they can deal with more of the oopses and get as much as possible out.
Yeah, I can imagine if they had to sort out 50%, they wouldn't do a very good job. But if they have to sort out 1%, they can.
Correct.
So the conveyor belt's going down, and they can only go so fast. Can you also, we have 3 bins. Mm-hmm. We have compost and recycling and landfill. Do all of those go down the conveyor belt at Smart Station, or just the?
No, just our garbage goes to the Smart Station. So they sort our garbage. Our recyclables go to the green waste recycling facility in San Jose on Charles Street, and it gets separated out by commodity type. So they sort all the different recyclables. And then our compost goes to the ZWED, so the Zero Waste Energy Development Company, which is the anaerobic digester in San Jose. And they anaerobically digest that, capture the methane, create renewable energy from that. And then the digest state, what's left over after that, is then shipped down to Z-Best in Gilroy, where it is then further composted. So it's composted and cured, and then it's sold as a landscaping soil amendment.
So what happens if someone puts a pizza box in their recycling? What happens to that?
Hopefully the green waste will be able to pull it out and it won't go in with the paper. The problem with pizza in general is a little bit greasy. And so grease can contaminate the paper load. And as you know, with everything going on in the recycling markets, they're wanting cleaner and cleaner recyclables. So green waste is spending a lot more time on the line pulling stuff out that doesn't belong in there. So if we could get our recyclables as clean as possible to them, they could really make sure it's right for market and make sure our stuff actually gets recycled.
So the pizza box, if they pull that out, does that get composted or does that get into the landfill?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure. I think green waste is really good about trying to do everything they can. But when they're pulling a bunch of garbage out of recycling as well, I don't think they have, I don't think they're pulling these lines, the stuff's coming down the line and they're pulling out stuff that's not supposed to be there and throwing it in bins. And so
they might just have one bin.
Landfilled.
Yeah. Okay.
I can double check if you. But yeah, they're not going to be sorting it like Smart Station's pulling stuff out for recycling, and they're also trying to get some of the compostable, although it's more fines like food waste and things that fall down and are heavy. But the green waste facility is really dealing with recyclables. And so we don't want to put things like pizza boxes in there because that slows them down from getting our recyclables sorted into commodity types to get to the market.
And sorting those recyclables, back in the olden days, when I first moved to Palo Alto, we had those 3 bins, right? We had the cans, we had the paper, and we had the plastics. Mm-hmm. And we sorted them ourselves. People obviously missorted that too. Can you talk about the single bin versus the 3 bins?
Yeah, so when I started in Palo Alto, we had just added the mixed paper crate. So we had the stacking crates and they were all different colors, the yellow, the green, the blue, and I think the dark green. And then in 2005, we switched over to single stream. So we used to do a survey out. I don't know if it was every year, but quite often asking people how they liked the program, how things were going. And we got a lot of feedback about wanting to simplify the program. And there was a lot of pushback about having the different crates. So if you sort of separate it at home and you have your glass separated from your aluminum and your metals separated from your paper, you do have a much cleaner stream. The trade-off is that it's less convenient. So when we moved to single stream, the community was very happy and our recycling numbers really shot up. So making it more convenient at the detriment of some quality to the stream, but it still wasn't bad. And it's still today, if we recycle right, if we have our stuff recycle ready, it's still very marketable material.
Okay, so the single bin you think overall is still a good thing. I mean, one of the problems is that you have more buy waste, right? The glass breaks and gets through and contaminates a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, so the glass breaking is less of a problem than it was in the beginning. When we first went to single stream, they were really worried about glass and the paper. And I think they've done a lot and they've created these new machines to figure it out and get the glass out. Now they break the glass when it goes to sorting and then it falls down and then it goes to a special recycler who can separate out the little bits of glass by color type. They have optical sorters that can figure out if it's clear or brown or green and do that. And they can, even some places can tell if it's window glass or not. We don't have that in our area. So that's why we want bottle and jar glass only, because there's different properties to all the different glass types. But I think the sorting is getting much more sophisticated. Our biggest issue is people that put jars in with food in it or with liquid still left in it. And people aren't just, you know, it's as simple as just pour it out. You don't have to rinse it. You don't have to, you know, let it sit upside down overnight to make sure every last drop is out. But you need to pour out your liquid so you don't have water or juice or whatever in there. And you need to make sure you're, you know, you scrape out your bin. You eat your yogurt, you eat all of your yogurt, you do this, and it's, you know, there's going to be a little around the rim, but that's clean enough. And I don't think residential's as much of a problem, but really like restaurants have a lot of goop left in there. Some of the multifamily complexes have some issues with that. So we've been doing a lot of outreach to encourage people to, you know, make sure, you know, don't put food and liquids in the recycling. But that's our biggest issue for marketability at this point.
And is that because of ignorance or is that because of indifference?
I do a lot of outreach about it, so I hope it's not because they don't know. But with so many things thrown at us today, there's just so much information that if it's not something you're really thinking about, the information can fly by you. So which is why we spend a lot of time saying the same thing over and over. Every year I have what I call my maintenance outreach to keep people up to date on kind of the really simple what goes where and these type of things. But some of it might be indifference too. For a while, Green Waste was just taking it and dealing with it at their facility. And I mean, really, China was taking it. They didn't mind. They wanted the material bad enough they would deal with it. And finally, they don't need the material that bad anymore. They're trying to clean up their stream. They have a ridiculous, it's really extreme, like it's 0.5% contamination is what's allowed, which is very difficult for the items they do still take. So really it's making us clean up the stream. And I think it's a good thing. I think, you know, by recycling, we are trying to make a raw material for a manufacturer to use. It's not somebody who's taking our garbage somewhere else other than landfill, right? And so if we think of it as a commodity that we're making at home, I think it's a much better way to think about our recycling system.
Are we having any problems finding buyers for our plastic?
So we haven't. So Green Waste has found buyers. I mean, obviously it's a market system, it goes up and down, but we worked a lot with Green Waste. They've done a lot to clean up their the streams. So they've added more people on the line and fixed their line to improve it. We've done the outreach to get it cleaner. And then we've also asked them to prioritize domestic markets so that we have a bit more control and we have a better feeling of where things are going and that there's better environmental controls and social controls. So all of our materials are marketed domestically. We're not changing what we accept. We've found a market for all the items on our list, on our accepted list. The only two exceptions are mixed paper that's going overseas and film plastic. But all the other plastics, the glass, the metal, and cardboard have good domestic markets.
Very good. You talked about demolition and versus disassembly for construction, house construction. How feasible is that? Does that add a lot of cost or is it just a technique and once people learn the technique, it'll be no problem?
Well, it starts tomorrow. So it's quite new, but we did do a lot of outreach and engagement with the construction community to figure it out. And that's why we're starting small with really, it's just a small amount of projects that have a full demolition, like they take a whole structure down. And we did a couple pilots as well to test it and see how it went. So we would have some information of that. And it does take more time and it does take more money to do deconstruction. So which is a very systematic unbuilding of a building, usually in the reverse order that you built it. And then you keep the components. We There'll also be a salvage survey. So there'll be a salvage group that'll come in before anything happens and say they'll take this wood, or they'll take those fixtures, or they'll take the brick. And then those items have to be set aside and taken to the salvage facility. And the rest have to be taken apart component by component so that you have clean wood together and you have gypsum board together. And then we can increase the recycling rate to over 90% for most of these items. So we'll get much better recycling rate. But it does increase, takes longer, and it's more labor intensive, so there is more cost. But if you think about the whole construction project cost and then the demolition cost, it's not like the whole thing will be increased. It's just that section that'll be.
Yeah.
But there will be
very small segment is increasing. Most
some
of it.
lessons learned from it that we'll need to figure out, especially as we start talking about expanding the ordinance. But that also will have to be a lot of community engagement to figure out what makes sense.
And finally, you talked about like the disposable cups. Can you talk about the trade-off between having, like in supermarkets, having the bag fee? You still can get a bag, but you have to pay a fee, as opposed to like some of the things like non-compostable silver we're banning. What's the trade-off of banning versus taxing?
So banning, like we banned the plastic bag, but we had the fee for the paper bag.
Yeah, and compostable right now, you can't get non-compostable silverware at all, right? In Palo Alto. And so we've banned some things, but other things we've decided to tax with the bag fee, for example.
Yeah, well, I think, it's a good question, and I don't have a great answer for you, but I think when you think about some items are banned because we really don't want them. Styrofoam is really bad, right? It's a litter issue. It's not very easy to recycle. While it's technically recyclable, it's really cost prohibitive to recycle. It has all kinds of problems. It also, there's toxic associated with it. So it was better to ban that. Plastic bags were those really thin takeout or to-go plastic bags at the grocery stores. Those are really bad items. We recycled them. They were accepted in our program, but the amount of bags that we would get when we used to have the recycling center, we would have a bin that people could fill up and bring their bags there. And that thing would just fill up and overflow. It was amazing how much were being used. And then those were only a portion. There was a lot of them that were getting and being littered. So it was something that was just a bad item we didn't want to have. But there are trade-offs because paper bags have their own issues, right? But you don't want to have no option for people at the store when they go to get their groceries. If you did forget your reusable bag, when I've worked for the city for 20 years, and I remember when I first came, I did outreach about bring your own bag to the grocery store. Only so many people were bringing their reusable bag. We got to a certain amount. We were doing checks at the grocery stores to see how many people were bringing their own bag, and outreach would increase it by a little bit, but not the majority. So adding the fee helped change the behavior so people would bring their reusable bag. So that was part of it was kind of incentive to bring your own bag if you didn't want to pay the fee for the paper bag. But if you forgot your bag, or you need a paper bag for your compostable collection that you want to put in your green cart, then you could pay the fee. So the fee allows you to have that item, but make different behavioral choices, whereas the ban takes it away. And I think it really just depends on how bad the item is, if we want to ban it, and whether there's a good option. And our current move towards compostable utensils and straws and stuff, compostables are good, recycling is good, but really what I hope to tell you when I explain what zero waste is, it's not really, recycling and composting aren't going to get us there. There's a lot of emissions from compostable items. So you have to grow the corn, the potato, whatever that utensil is made out of. And there's emissions from that and the transportation of those. And these single-use items, whether they're compostable, recyclable, or garbage, are things we want to move away from. And the banning the plastic was utensils and straws was because they were bad and we were having serious problems with them. Compostables, at least people will know it's easier for them. If everything's compostable, they just put it in the compost bin. We can compost it down. But also it's a bridge to get us to reusables and we haven't really figured out what does that mean? How would you have reusable to-go containers and utensils, and what's the system for that? We've piloted Go Box in Palo Alto for a few years, and we're talking with some other places, and things have kind of come to a halt with COVID, but we're trying to figure that out. And before we move to that phase, we need to test some things, but that's kind of our trajectory, is really going towards reuse. That's a lot better.
Okay, thank you. Very good. I appreciate your work.
Thank you, Keith. Lots of great questions. Jeff Lemire?
Commissioner Reckdahl.
Jeff, you're cutting in and out right now. Maybe be better to get back.
I'll try to reconnect, but I'm good with. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate what Commissioner Reckdahl clarified.
Thanks, Jeff. Jackie?
Hey, Wendy, thank you so much. This has been really intriguing, interesting, and I appreciate all of the information and all of our very ambitious goals. I hope we can meet all of those. I had a question about Rinconada Park and moving everything to the very large industrial looking bins. Has that resulted at all in more trash kind of scattered throughout the park for folks who aren't, maybe aren't able to locate a trash bin, or have you not had any problems with that?
No, we haven't. So these, the waste stations, right? Mm-hmm. No, in fact, illegal dumping and litter reduced during the pilot. It went down. We did have some people out on a few weekends handing out, we made little packets that were kind of what goes where guides. So kind of it had a little sorting guide on one side, and then it also contained 3 different bags. So a clear bag for garbage, a blue tinted bag for recyclables, and a green tinted compostable bag for compost, and kind of explained the program to them, to the park goers. And they liked it. It was very helpful. I think we had it available in some places for people to pick up too, if they had reserved a picnic area.
Cool. And then on the waste percentages, I was very surprised at kind of what came in high. We hear frequently, or at least I do, through different feeds about the fashion industry generating so much waste, but that didn't even make the list. Is that misinformation, or is it just that maybe in Palo Alto we give clothes away as opposed to throwing them in the waste?
We do have textiles on there, and I'm not sure what that number is. I know it was something we looked at also wanting to address in the zero waste plan. I think our first kind of thrust at that is adding it to the cleanup day. So now you have the textiles that are collected with the cleanup day collection to make that easier for people. But I think a lot of textiles go to the Goodwill or Salvation Army or Hope. We donate them. And then where does it go from there? If they don't get resold, people aren't buying that. If they're ripped or torn, they can be made into rags. But some of the stuff gets sent to other countries to use. And we don't really see where it goes then, right? So Palo Alto counts that as something that was reused, it was donated. But once it goes to Goodwill or the Salvation Army, and they separate it out on what they think they can sell and what our market just won't handle, but some other market would find it acceptable. And so, but I think kind of like China kind of came up to here with the dirty recyclables from us, I think we're hitting those limits in other countries with clothing. I know I went on vacation a couple years ago to Uganda, and they said they had just shut down accepting that kind of stuff from outside countries because they were just getting loads of stuff in that they just couldn't deal with. And some of the loads of just reusable stuff there, you know, how many popcorn machines can they, you know, absorb from us? So it's really interesting to think about. Donation is really great, but how many people really use what you're donating? And we do need to think about clothing as maybe look at Thread Up or something where we can sell it to someone or start purchasing reused. I don't know. But I don't think that those things about the fashion industry are off. I think it's definitely something we need to worry about, think about.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question on the demolition. I know you said it's just a small segment and it's only total demolitions. Does it apply starting tomorrow with residential housing, or is it more commercial projects?
It's both. It's residential or commercial. But it's only projects. So any project that puts in their, you know, applies starting tomorrow. So anybody who's already started the process isn't going to apply. So if they apply for their permit starting tomorrow and they want to take down a whole structure, then they will fall under this ordinance, whether it's residential or commercial.
And you did mention it was a small percentage. Is it, do you have is it less than 5% of projects?
I don't have that number. I could get that back, but it's just a few.
Okay. Okay, interesting.
A handful a year.
Okay, great. I think those were my only questions. Thank you again for the thoughtful presentation, Wendy.
Thank you. Commissioner Moss.
This has been an amazing presentation, and I had no idea. I mean, I'm pretty savvy, but there's a lot of stuff here that I didn't know. Anyway, I don't have any specific questions that need more clarification. I'm just amazed that 7% of our garbage is diapers. That is just absolutely amazing to me. Anyway, I don't have any more.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cribbs.
Yes, David, I'm laughing about the diapers because I remember the olden days with diapers when you used to wash them, right? At any rate, I think I have all my questions answered from fellow commissioners who were very thoughtful. Wendy, I thought it was a great presentation, lots to think about, certainly, and lots to have things done about. I wanted to mention that I love the Rinconada Park pilot project with the great big bins, and I was so happy to hear you say that they were working out well and that you had even provided, I thought residents and park permit holders with various kinds of bags, that they were happy to participate in picking up stuff. My hope is that someday we'll be able to extend kind of a culture of taking care of our parks to everybody who comes to the parks, and let people pick up their own stuff and put it into those multicolored bins that you showed. So thank you very much for all your work on that. It was great.
Thank you. I want to echo all the other commissioners' general thanks for this great presentation and enlightening us to ways to better preserve our environment. I think all of us are, we get the message and we want to do our part, but there's always so much more to learn. The clarifications on the food containers and how much waste you can get there is allowed is helpful. I know we always have questions about which plastic bags can be recycled or put them in a bag of bags, but is any kind of plastic allowed, or there are some set of plastics that aren't? So what's the best way to get questions like this? More subtle questions that aren't covered on the signage that's put on the bins.
Yeah, I think just give us a call or email us. We're always happy to answer questions, because there are these subtleties, these little things that, we always run this balance of giving enough information and giving too much information. And some people just want the basics, and other people's like, I want to know exactly where this little thing goes. And so we have a detailed list that's available on our, if you go to zerowastepaloalto.org/WGW tools. So it's the what goes where tools. There's a variety of, there's a short list, a detailed list, there's videos that may be very helpful for you. And if that information doesn't answer your question, I love to answer questions. Give me a call, send us an email. It's the zerowaste@cityofpaloalto.org, and we can answer it for you. If you have a particular item, if you want to take a picture of it and email it to us and say, hey, what do I do with this? We get a lot of that.
That's great. You will hear from me, because I'll save a bag of stuff like, I don't know about this stuff, but that's great to hear and get that clarified.
Yeah. And we do have, if we do have zero waste block leaders. So residents that have, that are really interested in, they've been trained to be experts in zero waste. They may be able to answer your question too. Like if we're not available, if it's on the weekend and you really want to know, we want to get rid of it, you could look up on our website and find the zero waste block leader and contact them, because that's what they've volunteered to do, is answer these types of questions too. They may or may not, if it's a fine detail one, they may not know themselves, but they know how to get a hold of me too to answer questions.
That's great. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the school district and developing young ambassadors for the program?
Yeah, so I work with the school district. We have a Zero Waste Champion program. And so we have a champion. It's a stipend position that we would like to have one at every school. We don't quite have a champion at every school, but they work then, they're kind of the expert at the school to answer zero waste questions and to try to facilitate and foster zero waste efforts. And we come together, they do outreach and education. They all do it differently, because every school site is different, but try to educate not only the students on what goes where and get them involved in projects. Like the most recent thing, which was really exciting, was the school district switched over to reusable lunchware at the beginning of last school year for the elementary schools. And they got the kids on board, and the kids are like, yeah, we know this doesn't get thrown away. This goes in the bin. So while it was an increase in labor to get the dishes, pick them up, get them washed, get them back out, it actually turned into a cost savings. But with COVID, that's all come to a halt. But they did projects like that. They were very important in helping that happens, and that kind of creates the atmosphere, or this is how we do things in Palo Alto. They also worked with administrative staff, so that, because the Zero Waste Champion needs to be a district employee at that school location. So they're able to work with the admin, they're able to work with the custodial staff, they're able to work with the other teachers and the students and kind of do projects there. So we've been doing a lot of work with that program in the last few years.
That's great. I know it's very successful. I see the fruits of it at my home with my kids.
Nice.
They're well educated in the process. And helping us all learn. How does our 82% diversion rate compare with other neighboring communities and on a regional basis as well?
That's a good question. I haven't even looked at that in a while. I've been so caught up with the Zero Waste Plan and our waste characterization study. I can get back to you. We're definitely at the forefront in terms of California. California itself, I looked that up, is at 60%. Diversion. but we're one of the leading cities. That said, trying to go back to that slide, we have a ways to go if we want to reach our 95%, which is going to be very difficult, right? That's definitely a stretch goal. And you can see how it's kind of plateaued. And so that's why I thought it was interesting when Christine talked about her spectrum of tools to achieve sustainability or the climate protection. But we definitely, it's the same thing for zero waste. And I think we're further along that spectrum. We've done, since I can remember, all kinds of voluntary stuff and trying to give incentives and encourage people to do certain things. And we're now moving more into ordinances like the construction demolition ordinance, the recycling and composting ordinance, the ban on the foodware. Like these things we're needing to move and create kind of a higher level, more change so that we can really attain our goals.
That's great. Are single-use water bottles used for any Palo Alto events still?
They're not supposed to be. And right now we don't have any events, so I don't have to worry too much about it.
That's easy.
They can be used at events that are not sponsored by the city. So if it's the chili cook-off, they don't use single-use water bottles. The art festival is allowed to sell the single-use water bottles. But a lot of events have worked with us to not have single-use water bottles and have the different hydration stations set up. Yeah. So it's kind of a work in progress of getting it all. And we have talked about, that's part of our disposable foodware ordinance that we'll be hopefully doing community engagement on at some point. We had thought we would be doing it in April, but COVID came up. So, but that'll be one of the things on maybe one of the other phases, like maybe we have a multi-phase plan, and one is to maybe extend the ban on single-use water bottles more across the board.
I appreciate that is a challenge. I know it can be a bit of a scourge hitting our parks after a busy weekend, trash bins or recycling bins, hopefully overflowing with a bunch of plastic single-use water bottles, but I know it is a challenge. Last question, could you clarify the different options for Palo Alto residents to drive to different locations to drop off different types of recyclable or hazardous materials? I know some stuff goes to the Sunnyvale Smart Station. Some stuff we have the hazardous waste. It's the exchange program.
The hazardous waste station that's located out near the water quality control plant. That's open and just reopened. Was the June 20th. So that is now open again. So you could take your hazardous waste there for drop off. It's every Saturday, 9 to 11, and then the first Friday of the month from 3 to 5. And then there are some places that will take like fluorescent bulbs or batteries, some of the hardware stores. We have on our website the Recycle Where search tool. So if you put in what you have, it'll show you where you can take your material, because there's some places take batteries and bulbs, and then hazardous waste, so medications. I think PAMP takes medications. Some of the Walgreens, I believe, take medications. So depending on what item you're looking for, there's different places to take it. And we've tried to kind of get that all into the Recycle Where search tool so you can figure that out. If you want to take your recyclables to a recycling center, we don't have one at Palo Alto anymore, but there is the Smart Station Recycling Center that you could go to. There's also a recycling center in Mountain View. I would double check on that though, because I know they were having some issues because of COVID. I think they might have closed to, but I don't know where they are in reopening. A lot of the buyback redemption centers closed throughout the state. So we're having some problems with that, having enough of those. Smart Station does have a buyback, and that is open. And I believe they're doing it by appointment at this time to kind of maintain the social distancing and whatnot. So that's on their website. And did that answer your question? Or
That's great. And it reminds me, I did use the recycleware search tool before and ended up going to the Smart Station to recycle something. So it works. It's very good. It's
oh, good. I'm glad you like it.
Got to be able to remember it. Thank you very much. Do any commissioners have any final comments? And Councilmember Koo? Okay. Thank you very much, Wendy. Appreciate your presentation and all of your efforts for our community. Thank you.
I just have to figure out how to unshare my screen. Which I'm not sure how.
Maybe
up at the top, it's red. You see the little red tab says stop.
Ah, there we go. Got it. Thank you.
There you are.
And that's a nice segue, Peter. Thank you. Up next is the review of the draft design of the Cameron Park Improvement Project. And Peter Jensen, you're up.
I will share my screen here. Slide this back over. Can everyone see the slideshow?
Yes, looks good.
Good. Commissioners, good evening. Good to be with you again under different circumstances than normally, of course, but we continue on as, of course, the landscape continues to age and need maintenance even during the age of COVID. Our next project that we're going to talk about is Cameron Park. It's the next one up on our renovation. Cameron Park is located in College Terrace. It's one of the 4 parks that are in that neighborhood, it being the one with the larger of the turf spaces. We're going to talk about what was proposed, what was discussed in the community meeting and community meeting feedback, what we're planning on proposing now, and of course taking some feedback and input from the commission. So I'm going to go through the presentation. If you'd like to ask questions as we go along, please feel free to do so. Presentation is not too long, should be fairly straightforward. I would like to point out that the image on the screen, the planting around the sign is actually quite fantastic. That's a Bayshore, which is a very rare plant from Mexico that puts off a beautiful flower. You don't see it that size very often, so just wanted to point that out, that it is kind of a cool feature to the park itself. We're talking about Capital Improvement Project PE 14002. There's a budget funding amount for $200,000 for it, or yeah, $200,000 for it. Not a big budget for a park, but good enough to do what we have to do out there to maintain the park and make the playground look nicer than it is. That money is earmarked for this year, so we will be planning on doing the design and outreach process and then moving into the construction drawings and then doing the actual construction this year. So hopefully be moving towards the kind of construction. We'll see if we can get there in the fall or winter of this year. The major aspect of the park renovation itself is the playground. The playground has reached its life expectancy, which is somewhere between 15 and 20 years is usually when they get replaced. That does take up the majority of the budget. We'll talk about what we're going to propose out there, because we are going to propose a couple different things for the playground. Right now it is a tot lot playground, which means it is for age 2 to 5. And it is a sand playground. So those are things we are going to address as we go along. There is some accessibility issues in the park. There actually is not an accessible pathway to get you through the park and over to the playground from this part of the street here. There's pathway dead ends under these trees and doesn't quite get you over there. So we're going to talk about some accessibility improvements, the connection through the path, and then replacing some site furnishings as far as the picnic tables, benches, trash receptacles, which you just heard a little bit about, a drinking fountain. Most of our work is going to be concentrated towards this end of the park. Like I said, this one park in College Terrace does have the biggest turf area. So we do want to maintain that as far as open outdoor space goes. Here's some existing images of the park. You can see the existing little tot lot playground. Tot lots, again, 2 to 5 year old age. Here is the sole picnic table that exists in the park that's at the dead end of the pathway there. And then this is image of mostly the existing turf area that takes up the majority of the park, which we're planning on maintaining that open space. This plan shows the proposed renovations that were taken to the community. We actually held the first Palo Alto community meeting online for this project. So it kicked off, I think, kind of a normal process here. But what we proposed was, of course, changing out the playground equipment, which is the number one. The number two was connecting the pathway through the park to actually get you over to the playground itself. Number three was reusing one of the tables that was in this location and providing another one and providing more than just one picnic table and clustering that closer to the playground. And then there's also some very nice shade trees in that location where we can put the picnic tables under. Site furnishing, as I mentioned, there's some old benches around the playground that we want to replace. The drinking fountain hasn't worked in quite a while. We want to fix that. And then there's some old school trash receptacles on site, and we're looking at using one of the new proposed divided recycle receptacles in the park. We are going to propose to plant some trees along this line to provide a little bit more shade to the playground. And that when we start to reconfigure the turf area a little bit, then we have to deal with the irrigation and reconfigure that to make sure it works with the new layout. We did have 2 bid alternates for the community to consider. The A1 was basically adding concrete walkways here. Currently, right now, there is no way, if you're walking down this sidewalk, you kind of dead end into the park onto the grass. There is no accessible walkway on either side that connects to that other side of the street. So we did propose that. We also did propose having a 42-inch fence around the playground. I believe that's more in response to basically what's happening with COVID, that when the time arises, when the playground needs to be closed, that it is possible to just close it with the gate and not tie caution tape around it as we're doing now. So this is basically the plan that was presented to the community for their feedback. We did hold actually 2 separate meetings. They were both on the same day, but at different times that allowed more people to participate. I can't say the turnout was high. I believe we had 14 to 18 overall community members that were involved. I would say, though, that we did try really hard to get people involved. We did send out postcards to all of the College Terrace neighborhood, every household. And we also did a mass emailing to their College Terrace group. So that's basically then what happened at the community meeting. Here's some images of what the proposed playground was look like. The other major change besides the playground becoming a little bit larger than what it was, we're also going to start mixing the age group. So besides it having 2 to 5 age equipment with the playhouse and the strap seat and the spring toy, we're also going to bring in some regular swings there. The climbing structure is also built for older kids as well, and of course the slide. And then this proposed playground equipment had an umbrella over the top to provide shade, which was actually really liked by the community members that participated in the meeting. Along with the community meeting, then we did do an online survey. We dispersed that for a period of 3 weeks right after the meeting. We got better turnout on that. 44 participants went through the survey. Some of the questions all 44 people didn't answer, but we got definitely a lot more feedback about the amenities and what the community wanted to see in the park. The community input, I can't say the community was a big fan of the fencing around the playground. They didn't really see a need for it since the playground is really off the main street and tucked back there in the corner. They did request us to conduct an online survey to get more community input, which we did. There was some comments about repairing the site drainage, which was an issue on the site. There was an actual neighbor water leak that was occurring that was making an area of the turf really not usable and wet, but that has been resolved. So I think that we have helped the turf area in that respect to be more usable. There was a need to add more shade to the playground besides the proposed trees and the shade over the structure that we're already showing. Plant more trees, of course, in the park itself. There was a need to provide other uses. Community garden, horseshoes, bocce court came up. We'll show you some opportunities where that can happen, but due to the restricted budget, those things are something we're going to have to develop in the future, or if the community would like to participate in either funding or actually working on, that is a possibility in the park itself. They did like the idea of providing play equipment for young or older children as well as the young children. They liked more swings. There was some responses about keeping some sand play, which the current playground design does not do. Currently, the proposed plan replaces the rubberized surfacing with rubberized surfacing that allows all the equipment and the playground itself to be fully accessible. Sand is difficult in that it is not an accessible surface and does do a lot of damage to the rubberized surface when you have to have it in there. So for this time, we've left it out of this playground. And then, of course, fixing the drinking fountain, which is something that everyone wanted, and apparently it's been broken for a while. So that's basically the feedback that we got from the community meetings. From our community survey, we went through 7 questions. The first question was just an overall general question about feedback, allowing people just to provide input about what they felt the park should have. That is enclosed in an attachment in the package if you want to read everyone's individual responses. Playground, the renovation of it, of course, shade, the drainage of the turf area. When the survey was released, of course, we were kind of right in the beginning of COVID. So there was a lot of folks that didn't feel that we should be spending any money on the park because of the budget talks that were going on. But I think we've kind of resolved that issue. And of course, then the pathways too. Then there was some just direct yes or no questions. Are you in favor of adding the concrete walkway? I would say that I was surprised by the community survey feedback from this, that it was as close. There seemed to be a lot of support for it in the community meeting, but you can see that 19 yes and 21 no is basically what the vote ended up being. There was support of eliminating the sand play with 22 yeses and 14 nos. There was not any support really for the fencing around the playground with 12 yeses and 27 nos. There was support, very slight or thin support for adding a barbecue to the picnic area. And then there definitely is support for adding other amenities to the park to provide some other things to do there. So 24 to 11 no's for that. And then the 7th question was more about prioritization. If we had limited funding to spend, which we do, then what things should we focus on spending that funding towards? The shade structure and community garden actually were the things that came out as the highest as far as priority goes. for new types of amenities in the park. And then it basically went down from there. So that was kind of the community survey results that we got from the online survey. From that feedback, then we kind of revised our plan. We've maintained the playground like it is. It still has rubberized surfacing. It does not have sand. It does have an added shade structure over the swing that actually shades the swing very well. We've maintained the accessible pathway there, even though that the majority by one doesn't feel that it should be there. I think for overall accessibility purposes and access to the playground that we definitely should have it. And just the way that the trail system or the pathway system is laid out now, it's kind of a no-brainer and an easy thing to do. So we've kept that in the plan. We've kept the picnic area in the plan with the 2 tables under the tree. We've added a number 4 is the dark little box that's there is the barbecue to the picnic area. And then the site amenities as well with the new drinking fountain. And then we have not, and then the trash receptacle is basically right next to the drinking fountain. I do have some images of these things that we can look at. And then planting another tree closer to the playground there. Right now there's 3 very nice red oaks that are planted next to the playground. I'd say they're probably about 15 or 20 years old. The tree grows extremely fast, so I think we're just going to add one to the grove of those trees there and let them grow together. I would say eventually within 10 or 15 years, they will actually shade over the entire playground. That's how big and broad and fast they grow. Not a tree that you would normally grow for a street tree, but in a park works quite well. The bid alternatives in the plan that we're showing here, the A is showing a bocce ball court that could be added to the park. The little tiny or the smaller rectangle inside that would be the size of a horseshoe pit. So those 2 things could be added at that location. The B is basically converting that existing kind of turf area and some of the ad hoc planting area that's there and converting it into a community garden. Each one of those little rectangles represents a 6x10 garden plot. So that is definitely something that could be there. That little piece of turf, when it's divided away from the main part of the turf, definitely becomes a prime candidate for reducing or eliminating it as just as a maintenance thing. So I could see over time, if the community was really active and wanted to work on the community garden, that this is something that they could just go out there and in working with conjunction with city staff, start working and creating the garden out there. Wouldn't be very difficult to start to get some hose bibs out there off the existing irrigation system. Most of the work, of course, is just labor and the removal of the turf and building of the garden plots. I do see that actively taking place at all our community gardens where there's a spot that hasn't been used, and slowly over time people push themselves out there and expand the community garden. This happens a lot at Rinconada where the ivy used to be. That's slowly being removed. Fortunately, grass is a lot easier to move than ivy, so this is something that if the community wanted to actually put the labor and work into it, is something that probably could definitely be achieved. We don't have any funding for these 2 alternatives now, but I think I'm going to bring them up in the community meeting to see if we can spark some interest and see if there is something there that people do want to work on or do, or maybe even provide some funding for. This is a new image of the playground equipment. So the same equipment as before, except now the actual swing structure is using its posts to support a shade structure over the top of the swings. So the swings are in the shade, of course. These are some of the site amenities that we'd be proposing. There's the recycle receptacle that you heard a little bit about in the last presentation. Of course, a new drinking fountain, a table, that matches the existing one that's basically out there, and then the kind of the bench that we've been using for newer park renovations, the recycled lumber benches there. So currently we're showing a drinking fountain that does not have a bottle filler. That's mostly just based upon cost. We do like to use a very, I guess it's say more high-end water fountain, just because it's able to stand up over a longer period of time. We found this particular one that the buttons don't break and it doesn't clog as easy. But if you start to get two drinking fountains and a bottle filler, you're talking about an $11,000 drinking fountain. So we can look at proposing that. The other ideas to the drinking fountain is either you just have the drinking fountain as it showed in the picture, or you eliminate the drinking fountain aspect altogether and have just a water bottle filler. In this day of COVID, that probably would be not a bad idea, but I don't know exactly how long COVID's going to go on. So eventually it would probably be nice to have a drinking fountain too. So something that can definitely be discussed. Here's a kind of a short project schedule. So again, we're working on the design and community outreach aspect now, which of course includes the Park and Recs Commission. We'll be going to the community again on Thursday night to review the proposed new plan. We will be bringing back the final plan to the Parks and Recs Commission sometime over the next couple months to finalize. Then we'll be working on the construction drawings and going out to bid sometime, hopefully in the fall. And then in sometime in the winter, I would say more like November, December, hopefully, then we'll start to do the construction out there. Like I said, the budget is fairly small, $200,000 is not very much. A construction shouldn't last too long, probably a 30-day contract to do the work out there. The project does have a project webpage. The presentation from the first community meeting, the project summary, as well as the survey information, the online survey results can all be found there. And that's just basically the city website with a / and Cameron Park as the direct link to that. And with that, I'll turn it over to the commission for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Peter, for a very thorough and clear and concise presentation as usual. Do any commissioners have any clarifying questions for Peter? Looks like there's no members of the public who are looking to speak, so we can move on to commissioner comments. David, do you have comments, questions? Commissioner Moss, do you have any comments or questions?
The only question I had was whether or not you could make a playing field out of the field for little kids, or whether anybody asked for a dog park anywhere in College Terrace, in any of the parks.
Dog park did not come up in College Terrace during the community meeting. It is something that I can bring up to see if there's any appetite for. I would say that the majority of the parks, of course, in College Terrace, they aren't very big. This actual size of the park would be the size that we would like to have most dog parks at. So, and of course, we wouldn't want to use the whole park for a dog park. So, but that is something that we can find out more. David, what was your other comment?
If the field was big enough
the field
to play on it.
I don't know much about the programming of the field. I don't know, Darren, do you have any feedback on that? I don't know how I don't think the field is actually programmed for any type of use there, but the only thing that would be limiting is just the existing trees that are kind of growing out in the middle of it. But, you know, for probably little kids for soccer practice, it probably would be okay, I would say.
That's all.
I think that's the most. It's just been little tiny bit of soccer practice. It's too small for any sort of games or athletic competitions out there.
That's all I got.
Thank you, David. Jackie?
All right, thank you, Peter. Question for you. Are we not considering a bathroom here because most people probably live close enough by and can run home to use the bathroom?
Yeah, this was the determination on where we've decided to move forward with restrooms. We did during the Parks Master Planning process a couple years ago. It was based upon mostly park size and then park amenities. This park is not at the size that kind of meets that requirement, even though there is a playground that's there. But definitely in the overall use of it as well, that the playground is used mostly by the local community that's very close by to it. Not a lot of cars driving there to use the playground facility. So for that purpose, and just because of the size of the park and the overall cost of doing the restroom, then no restroom for the playground or the park is proposed at this time.
Got it. Thank you. Do we have a sense of whether there is still a lot of demand for community gardens, particularly in this area?
It was brought up in the community meeting from community members, and when it definitely was brought up in the community survey, that it was definitely supported by the community. So I think that there is a support to have such a thing. I think if it was out there and we built it, that definitely people would come to do it. Unfortunately, I don't have the funding to actually build that thing for them, but you know, I think showing that there is a possibility to have one, you know, it's mostly about work anyway to have a community garden. So, you know, I think that we wouldn't be opposed if people wanted to embark and have a community garden there and wanted to work on it, that staff could assist them in figuring that out.
And Commissioner Olson, if I could just chime in to add a little bit of detail to your question about how do we gauge interest in community gardens for projects like this? Catherine Borkwin, who of course is online with us, could maybe elaborate. But when we had the church property that we recently transitioned into a community garden, she had done outreach to see and checked with existing people on waiting lists. If we had a garden here, would you want to, before we made the investment in building it? And I think if we started to hear via this community outreach process and Peter's work that there is some interest, we'd probably do a little bit more to make sure that there is enough, because otherwise you could start it and have them lie fallow, especially with a site like this where there's no parking lot.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And the one at the church looks fabulous, by the way. The question about the water bottle filler, I would definitely advocate for a water bottle filler for both for purposes of having people use their reusable bottles, but also even when COVID is gone, I do think a number of people are still going to be creeped out by, you know, touching things. And I think to have a hands-free way to get water is going to be important for a long time. And then the other thing is I would just definitely like reinforce or advocate for that accessible pathway. I'm glad that you pushed forward on that. So thank you for that. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Lemaire let me know that he's not in range to talk right now. Ann?
Yes, thank you. I stopped by the park today and it is just really, Peter, a lovely little park. And I think the things that you found through the community outreach look like it'll make really nice additions. So I was really glad to see that. Darren, thanks for answering the question, which was about, is there parking? Because I didn't see any parking. Then I would worry about the community gardens and people would have to bring stuff in. I didn't exactly see how that would work, but if there's a need for a community garden, then maybe we should pursue it. Peter, do you have an idea of how much a garden plot costs? Can you put a dollar figure on that at all?
I
Not-
haven't costed it out yet. I mean, it's not a big space. It is mostly about the labor of just removing the turf.
Oh, okay, great.
So it's not very much. I would say you could probably really start getting it going pretty well for $10,000 to $15,000. So
Okay,
it's not
great.
like an overall big investment. Mostly it does rely on the community to make the investment of time to go out there and care for it and maintain it and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, suspect that there's some more work to be done to figure out whether people really want that. But I like the fact that you have pointed out that there was not money for some things, but it might be a place where the community could participate in some fundraising. So it's good to have that included, but otherwise it's a great presentation. Thank you very much. And it is a lovely, lovely park. It just had a great feel to it.
Thank you, Ann. Peter, I have a few questions and comments. One, I think the walkway makes sense. It's probably required for ADA compliance, I would guess. I would support that as Jackie has mentioned. It's great to see the updated recycling receptacles as we would expect after the previous presentation. I think those are great. On the community garden, I'm very supportive of the idea. I was very, very happy to see that in it. I was wondering if it would be a possibility for private partnership funding to assist with it. And as it turns out, we don't have any funding. So yes, we would need something like that. Yeah. Would there be a city budget to supply hose bibs if the neighborhood community was interested in moving forward with that?
Yes, definitely. Because the walkway is going to require some reconfiguration of the irrigation, and we do have money set aside to do that. So, in this area, if that valve that's operating it gets abandoned, then it's fairly close to the same price of adding some hose bibs out there to provide water. So,
thanks. Maybe I should have started off with my next question before that one. So while I'm very heartened to see the idea of a community garden, I'm concerned about the location and the proximity to trees and shade and gardens like Sun, and it does seem to be a pretty shady corner that's only going to increase with time. So I was wondering if the opposite corner would be a potential, or I don't know if there's concerns, if there's issues with running water or trying to maintain contiguous field space, although it's kind of cut off by those big trees there anyway.
It's definitely something that we can bring up in the meeting on Thursday to see if there's other locations. Again, this location just was more optimal because we are kind of dividing and creating just a little tiny turf space over there that's not overly usable for anything. So the trees there, though, the casuarinas, they are fairly upright. They don't have very large canopies. The canopy is fairly way up off the ground a good amount. Definitely they will produce some shade for the garden, but I would say that their impact would be fairly minimal, that you're still going to get your full sun on your garden plots there. So just because the type of trees and the way they're growing, I think that they're conducive to kind of working with the garden in that space.
Okay, and the circle number 5, that would be a new red oak. So that would
be red oak, exactly.
Right. So that's going to be covering that part of the area eventually. Yep. Right, just something to consider depending on how these things we're looking to grow. My next question is, I hesitate to ask at a certain point, but I think it's important to ask. it sounds like construction would take place towards the end of this year, and I'm not in favor of losing funding allocated for park improvement, but I'm concerned about the construction taking place if shelter in place and social distancing guidelines are still going on. We're going to have this shiny new park, playground, and picnic area that's set up that people aren't allowed to use. And in conjunction with sensitivity, does it make sense to be spending the money on this right now? Is there some sort of a short-term swap that would make sense?
Well, I'm not sure about the short-term swap. I think that we should be sensitive to whatever is happening at the time that this comes to bidding out and doing the construction. I do agree that because of the size of the project and the speed that it can be built, that if it behooved us to wait a few more months or 9 months, then that's something that we should consider. Right now, I don't know what that is until we get to that point. So, but that is definitely something that I know staff will be discussing. The playground design will come back to the commission again for a final review. So, hopefully in a couple of months from now, maybe we have a little bit more clarity and we can talk about that more. As long as we continue to move the money out, then the money stays there. Of course, the longer time that goes on, the money is less valuable than it is right now. So those are all factors that should be determined. But I think that we should keep an open dialogue about that when it comes to the building of it.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. I am all in favor of moving forward with the project. Just think we need to consider the timing. Does anyone else have any follow-ups?
I've got a quick question. Peter, you talked about if you had 2 drinking fountains and also the bottle filler, it'd be really expensive. If you instead went to 1 drinking fountain and bottle filler, is that more reasonable?
I would love if we could do that. And a lot of times the manufacturers try to specify that, but unfortunately in California, if we have 1 drinking fountain, we have to have 2. You have to have both heights. So
really, you just can't go low?
No, you got to have one that's a little bit higher than the other one. So if you have, so if you have 2, then you got to have the other one. So that's, I think, where the expense then comes from, because they basically have to put another arm on their drinking fountain. It's for the bottle filler. It's actually not in the top. It's over on one of the side arms. So it's just more costly, of course, to build. So I wish that was an option, but pretty much the option is having 2 drinking fountains, having 1 bottle filler, or having the bottle filler and 2 drinking fountains all in one. So.
Okay, nothing's easy.
No, it's not.
Let's see, the shade structure, I'd love that. As a redhead growing up, I wish I had that over my swings.
Yes, definitely.
And then also the sand. That's another thing as a kid. I spent a lot of time making huge sand castles. So, but that's a neighborhood call. If they want the sand, then.
Yeah, and I think that we'll flush that out on Thursday night. We'll see how people feel. There's definitely always, there's room there that we can put like we did in Eleanor Party, sand play area separate from the playground adjacent to it. So if that is a need, then we can definitely, we can add that in there.
And especially if you have sand, you need some water. So would it be possible to put a doggy spout on the drinking fountain so the kids can fill up the water and then run it across?
Well, that is just, that's another drinking fountain thing. Fortunately,
you
that
can't...
drinking fountain company does not make a 2 drinking fountain, 1 bottle filler, and a dog bowl. So you can have 2 drinking fountains and a dog bowl, or you can have a bottled water filler and a dog bowl, but you can't have all 4.
How about if you had just 3 and just had 2 drinking fountains and a doggy? Is that
Then
possible?
You can have that, yes. Then you can have that.
Sounds like a business opportunity.
Yeah.
No, it's even some of the parts we've just looked at, even just putting a dog, because you can buy the bowl by itself and just having that next to it. So that's an option as well.
Thanks for the clarifications. Anyone else?
I have one last comment about the demand. In College Terrace, the lots are so small that most people don't have room for a garden. So I suspect if we put a community garden here, we get a lot of action just because they can't plant it in their backyard. But
I was surprised that on the prioritization that ranked as high as it did, as far as people really wanting that space. So I would not have predicted that.
And that's partly why I'm thinking big about the opposite corner.
Right.
yeah, I agree with that too. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're ready to move on to the next item, which is other ad hoc committee and liaison updates. Do any commissioners have any ad hoc updates to offer that weren't in the included in the packet, or would like to further comment on anything? Okay.
Jeff, can you hear me? This is Jeff Lemaire.
Yes, I can hear you, Jeff. Go ahead, please.
Yes. So the Foothills Park ad hoc, we had a call with Darren and Kristen yesterday, actually, and we'll meet again next week and discuss different options and path forward in light of what happened with the pilot proposal at the city council meeting.
Okay, very good.
We also are one more person.
That's coming up next on my list. Thank you. One question I wanted to ask you, Darren, to clarify, if Park and Recs were to act to support an updated recommendation on the Foothills Park access program to City Council, it seems like this would further delay when this item could be agendized by City Council due to the needs for an updated CSD staff report and departmental review. Is that accurate?
Chair. Thank you for that question, Chair. Yes, it's slightly dependent on what the nature of the recommendation is and whether there's more thoughtful staff research that needs to go into it to determine viability, costs, budget implications, things like that. So I think it might depend a little bit on that, on how long it takes. And then of course, a new staff report does go through a review process that takes a little bit of time. It's difficult for me to say how long that process would be, but we would certainly do our best to expedite it as fast as we could.
And this is hypothetical, of course, but it's good to understand that, with particularly with sensitivities within the community wanting to have City Council to take up this subject at some point, and so I think that's good to clarify. Thank you. I also next I want to talk about assignments on the ad hocs. Just to follow up from our previous meeting, wanted to confirm that Jeff Lemaire has agreed to serve as the golf liaison for the commission, and thank him for doing so. And then as left the commission, former Commissioner Mccauley, there's roles vacated that are available for assignment on ad hocs and as the community garden liaison. These are we currently have two members of the commission sitting on the three ad hocs that Ryan was on. We can leave these as 2-member ad hocs, or we can add a third person if people are interested. These include the Baylands 10.5 acres ad hoc, which currently includes Commissioners Lemaire and Reckdahl. The Foothills Park ad hoc, which is Commissioners Lemaire and Olson, and the Park Improvements ad hoc, which is Commissioners Vice Chair Cribbs and Commissioner Moss. And then there's also the liaison role for community gardens. So I'd like to know if anyone is interested in joining any of these ad hocs or taking on the community gardens liaison role.
Chair,
Yes, Ann.
I would like to join the Foothill Park Ad Hoc Committee. I have lost you.
You're on mute. Yeah.
I can
Thank
see your
you.
lips moving.
Strike two. Thank you. Before we, well, I think why don't we let all the commissioners comment on what they would be interested in, and then we can work as a body to make decisions on that.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd mentioned that I'd do Foothills Access too, but I'd rather have Ann do it.
Okay, so thank you, David. So you would defer to Ann on that. Are you interested? So, okay, are you interested in anything else? The Baylands 10.5 or community gardens and park improvements, which you're already on. Anybody else?
I'm interested in the Baylands.
Jeff, you're already on two of these. So the park improvements would be the only one up for you. And we don't need to add someone else to that necessarily.
To which the park improvements?
The park improvements, which is currently you and David.
Yeah, I mean, we're okay with that. Unless anybody wants to join us, of course.
And anybody up for taking on community gardens? Jackie?
Sure.
Sold to the high bidder. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that Jackie would be interested in joining the Baylands 10.5 acres ad hoc and willing to take on the community gardens liaison role, and Vice Chair Cribbs would like to join the Foothills Park ad hoc. If no one has any further comments on this, then we can go ahead and make this happen. Since this isn't an action on the agenda, that we're not going to vote on this, but we'll just work to put this in place. Okay. Thank you. That covers this agenda item. Next up is the agenda for our next meeting, which is coming up on July 28th.
Can I make one last comment? And that is that there's rumblings that the pickleball people would like maybe to create a 501(c) for maintenance. I don't know if anybody's heard anything about it. I'm gonna send it over to Adam.
Thanks, and we could take this up in the parks on the appropriate ad hoc, the park and facility use policy, which works with the pickleball groups. Anything else before we move on? Okay, let's move on to the agenda. I think it's important for us as a commission to strive to focus our efforts on some of the significant issues of the day. And to that end, Vice Chair Cribbs and I will be meeting with staff later this week to talk about how Parks and Rec can help get involved with some of the issues going on with city programs and other things of that nature. Next month, we do have a GSI plan implementation on the calendar, continuing with what I'll call our sustainability speaker series, which I think was very informative and useful this evening. And the programs and fund development ad hocs also hoping to be able to put something on the agenda regarding ideas for community funding of recreation programs. Did I get that right, Ann? Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, you did get that right about community funding. That's perfect. And I don't know whether this is an agenda item for next time or not, but I would just like to suggest that we all reread the staff report or that went to the city council, or maybe it was the city council's report about equity and access and reviewing programs to see if we're really complying. Darren provided the report to me. It was in a presentation, and I think it's really, really good. And rather than, I think at the end of our meeting last time, we talked a little bit about looking at all of our programs in terms of inclusion and access and fairness, and was it right? And so I think rather than us inventing the wheel again or reinventing it, it would be good to read that staff report, and maybe Darren, you could send it around to all the commissioners. Is that appropriate?
I'd be glad to. This is a council staff report.
Yeah, it's the council staff report. Thank you very much. It's getting late and I was, yeah. So if I would just suggest that everybody read it, and there's a particular part at the end about community services to everybody and community service programs. And I think it gives us the opportunity to look at things like scholarships for swimming lessons and middle school athletic programs and a number of other programs that we have that we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to be part of. So.
Yep. Thank you. Our vice chair has been very busy on these endeavors, and I appreciate it. I'm fully supportive, and I think it's a great idea to forward that. Darren, other thoughts on next month's agenda?
I don't know if Peter is still with us. Peter, are you still there? I wanted to double check with Peter if he had any presentation information he needed to run by the commission on Ramos or any of our other projects. Peter, are you there? And if not, that's okay. I'll check with him shortly and get back to you, Chair, on this one.
Darren, I am here.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Anything on your list for agenda items for July 28th?
The only one that I'm hoping that we can make it would be Ramos Park.
Okay.
So I'll know probably better in here like the next week if we can get to the next commission meeting. I think that we should be able to.
That's great.
And Chair, then we may or may not, we may or may not discuss Foothill Park depending upon what the ad hoc committee says next week and how other things develop. We don't have to decide tonight, right? We have some time.
Absolutely. About
whether or not to put it on the agenda or wait until we see what other things are going to transpire.
Yes. So that's a potential that if the ad hoc has something to bring to the commission, that could potentially be on the agenda next month as well.
Okay.
And we're talking about potentially 4 items here. That's probably too much. We probably need to go down to three items so we can make sure we're not out of here later next week than we are this week, which is a little later than I'm aiming for. Anything else? Great. Moving on to comments and announcements. Does anyone have anything else to add? Commissioner or Councilmember Koo, thank you for sitting in with us. Is there anything you'd like to say? We appreciate your presence here. With that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Vice Chair and seconded by Commissioner Moss. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Great night.
Stay
Okay.
safe.
Good night.
Happy 4th.